You are sitting in a chair near the window because the light is better there for mending. The chair is made of wood that has been smoothed by years of hands gripping the armrests and years of wool skirts rubbing against the seat. It does not creak when you shift your weight. The floor beneath the chair is wide pine boards with gaps between them that have been filled with a mixture of flax tow and tallow so the wind does not come out through the cracks. You can feel the slight unevenness of the boards through the thin leather of your shoe soles, but you are not paying attention to that. You are paying attention to the linen in your hands. The linen is a shift that belongs to the man of the house. It is a garment that sits close to the skin under the heavier wool of his everyday coat, and for that reason it wears thin in certain places. The place you are mending today is along the shoulder seam, where the fabric is frayed from the constant rubbing of a leather strap when he carries a load of firewood into the house. The tear is not large. It is about the length of your thumb, and it runs along the line of the original stitching where the sleeve meets the body of the garment. The edges of the tear are not sharp like a cut from a knife, but soft and blurred where the individual flax fibers have separated from their twist over many weeks of wear and washing. The linen is a color that you know very well. It is not white. White linen is for special days and for the fine caps that women wear to meeting. This linen is the color of unbleached flax that has been washed in lye soap and dried in the sun over a whole summer and then worn next to the body for another winter. It is a warm grey-brown with undertones of yellow that only show themselves in a certain slant of light. You have been looking at this color for so long this afternoon that if you closed your eyes, you would see it still printed on the inside of your eyelids. In your right hand, you hold a needle made of steel. It is a fine needle with a small oval eye and a sharp point that you keep pushed into a scrap of wool flannel soaked in mutton fat so it does not rust. The needle has a slight curve to it now from years of passing through heavy cloth, and you have learned to account for that curve in your stitching. You do not think about it consciously any more than you think about the shape of your own thumb. In your left hand you hold the linen and you keep a gentle tension on the fabric so the tear does not gape open, but also so you do not pull the weave out of true. The thread you're using is linen thread of the same quality as the cloth. It is a single strand that you have waxed by drawing it across a small cake of beeswax that sits in a wooden dish on the windowsill beside you. The wax darkens the thread slightly and gives it a faint sticky quality that helps it hold the knot and keeps the individual fibers from untwisting as you pull it through the weave. The thread passes between your thumb and the side of your first finger. You can feel the slight texture of it. It is not perfectly smooth. There are tiny slubs in the thread where the flax fibers were not completely even when they were spun. These little bumps catch against the ridges of your fingerprint, and you notice them each time we draw a fresh length of thread through the needle. The window beside you is made of oiled paper stretched across a wooden frame. The paper is not from a book or a printed broadside, but from a mill that makes paper for wrapping goods and for writing letters. It has been treated with linseed oil that was pressed from flax seeds harvested 3 autumns ago. The oil has yellowed the paper over time and made it translucent but not transparent. You cannot see through the window the way you can see through a pane of glass from a fine house in Boston or Salem town. You see only shapes and the general quality of the light. Right now, the light coming through the oiled paper is a soft grey that holds a hint of the dampness in the air outside. It is early spring and the ground has not yet fully thawed. The light that falls on your hands and on the linen in your lap has a cool weight to it. It is the kind of light that makes shadows seem closer and colors seem deeper. The grey of the linen takes on a slightly blue cast in this light. The dust motes that float in the air between you and the window are very small and very slow, and they drift upward on the faint current of warmth rising from the hearth behind you. Behind you, the hearth fire is burning low. It is not a large fire because it is only late afternoon, and the full cold of the night has not yet arrived. The fire is built of 2 split logs of oak and a single backlog of green beech that hisses softly as the moisture inside it turns to steam and escapes through the end grain. The sound of the hissing is very quiet and steady, and it has been going on for so long that you no longer hear it unless you stop to listen. The fire gives off a small amount of heat that reaches your back and shoulders, and it gives off a smell. The smell is not the sharp smell of a new fire, but the settled smell of a hearth that has been burning for months. The stones at the back of the fireplace are stained black with years of soot, and the soot itself has a particular odor that is dry and faintly acrid, and it mingles with the smell of the warm ash that has built up in a soft grey pile beneath the andirons. The andirons are made of iron, and they have a simple shape with a curved foot and a straight upright bar. They have been in this fireplace for longer than you have been in this house, and the iron has taken on a dull patina that is somewhere between black and deep brown. You shift your weight slightly in the chair. The movement is small, and it is made not because you're uncomfortable, but because the body wants to change its position after a long period of stillness. You tuck your feet more firmly under the hem of your skirt, and you feel the wool of the skirt settle against your ankles. The skirt is made of a heavy wool in a color that is called linsey-woolsey grey. It is a practical color that does not show dirt, and it is a practical fabric that is warm even when it is damp. The wool has been fulled, so the individual threads are matted together, and the surface of the fabric has a soft fuzzy texture. When you move your legs, you hear a faint sound like a sigh as the wool slides against the wool of your other skirt underneath. You wear two skirts in this season because the house is never truly warm except in high summer. The outer skirt is the one you see, and the inner skirt is an older one that has been patched many times and is softer from many washings. Your hands return to the mending. You have placed the first few stitches already. They are small stitches that run parallel to the original seam line. You use a stitch that is called a running stitch or sometimes a gathering stitch, but you do not call it anything in your mind. It is just the way you close a seam. The needle goes down through the fabric from the top and comes up again a small distance away and then goes down again. The thread follows the needle and leaves behind a dashed line of tiny loops on the surface and longer floats on the underside. You keep the stitches very small because this is a place on the garment that will receive wear, and a larger stitch would catch on things and break sooner. The length of each stitch is about the width of a kernel of rye. You do not measure this consciously. Your hand knows the distance. Your hand has known this distance since you were a girl sitting beside your own mother in a different house with a different window, but the same kind of light. The needle makes a sound as it passes through the linen. The sound is not loud. It is a soft popping sound that happens when the steel point pushes aside the threads of the weave, and then a faint scraping sound as the shaft of the needle follows. The wax on the thread makes the thread pass through with less friction, and the sound is softer when the thread is freshly waxed. You wax the thread again after every 10 stitches or so. You reach for the small dish of beeswax on the sill, and you draw the thread across the edge of the cake. The beeswax is a warm golden color, and it has a scent that is sweet and faintly floral, and it reminds you of summer meadows, even though the bees that made this wax collected their nectar from clover and apple blossoms and goldenrod in a field that is now covered with frost-cracked earth. You hold the thread taut for a moment after waxing so the wax can set slightly before you continue stitching. Outside the house there is a sound. It is the sound of a single crow calling from somewhere in the direction of the common field. The call is 3 notes descending in pitch, and then a pause, and then 3 notes again. The sound is muffled by the oiled paper and by the walls of the house, which are made of thick planks with chinking of clay and straw between them. You hear the crow, but you do not look up. The crow is a part of the afternoon, the same way the light is, and the same way the smell of the hearth is. The crow calls 3 more times, and then it is silent. The silence that follows is not a complete silence. There is the hiss of the green beech log in the fire, and there is the soft pop of the needle through linen, and there is the sound of your own breathing, which is slow and even. Your breath moves in and out without any effort on your part. You can feel the slight movement of the air just below your nose, and you can feel the warmth of your breath as it passes over your upper lip. You finish the row of stitches that closes the tier. You do not tie a knot yet. You look at your work, and you see that the 2 edges of the torn fabric now lie side by side with only the thin line of thread holding them together. The seam is not invisible. It will never be invisible because the original fabric has lost fibers, and the new thread is slightly brighter than the old thread. The new thread is the color of unbleached flax that has been washed but not worn, and it will darken with time and with wear and with the next washing. You think about this without really thinking about it. It is the kind of thought that passes through the mind like a cloud passes across the face of the sun and leaves no shadow behind. You pull the needle through to the underside of the fabric and you make a small backstitch to lock the thread in place. Then you make another small backstitch beside the first one. The two backstitches sit on top of each other and they form a tiny knot that is hidden in the fold of the original seam. You cut the thread with a small pair of iron shears that hang from a cord tied to your waist. The shears are not sharp enough to cut paper cleanly, but they are sharp enough for linen thread. The sound they make is a small snick that is almost lost in the larger quiet of the room. You tuck the loose end of the thread into the seam with the point of the needle so it will not catch on anything. The mending of the shoulder seam is finished. You do not put the shift down immediately. You hold it up to the light from the window and you look at the place you have just mended. The light comes through the linen and you can see the denser line of the seam where two layers of fabric and the thread create a slight shadow. You run your thumb over the stitches. They lie flat against the cloth. They do not pucker the fabric. The tension of your stitching was even, and the fabric has not been pulled out of its natural drape. This is a good mend. It will hold through many more loads of firewood and many more washings. You do not feel pride exactly. You feel a quiet satisfaction that is similar to the feeling of closing a door properly or stacking a pile of wood so it does not fall. It is the feeling of a thing being as it should be. You fold the shift carefully. The folds are made along the lines that have been pressed into the fabric by many previous foldings. The linen has a memory of its own shape, and it wants to lie in certain ways. You smooth the fabric with the flat of your hand, and you place the folded shift on the top of the small pile of other mended garments that sits on the floor beside your chair. There is a pair of wool stockings with a darned heel and a linen apron with a new tie and a man's neckcloth that you hemmed this morning. The pile is not large. It represents the work of a day and a half of sitting by this window. Tomorrow there will be more mending. There is always more mending. The wearing of cloth is a slow and continuous process that never stops as long as people move and work and sleep. The light from the window has changed. It is a little dimmer now and the grey has deepened into a color that holds more blue than it did before. The shadows in the corners of the room have grown larger and softer, and they have begun to reach out toward the center of the room. The fire in the hearth is lower still. The green beech log has stopped hissing and is now giving off a thin stream of smoke that curls up the chimney in a lazy spiral. The oak logs have burned down to coals that glow a steady orange-red, and they shift occasionally with a soft ticking sound as the ash settles. You become aware of the weight of your own head on your neck, and the way your shoulders have settled into a slight curve from leaning forward over your work. You straighten your back slowly and you feel the small muscles along your spine stretch and then settle into a new position. You place your hands flat on your thighs and you feel the rough wool of your skirt and the solid warmth of your own legs beneath. Your hands are still. The needle is tucked back into the scrap of wool flannel. The beeswax sits in its dish. The thread is wound around a small wooden spool that fits into the palm of your hand. All of the tools of your work are in their proper places, and they are ready for the next time you sit down. The room around you is very still. The walls are made of wide planks of pine that have darkened with age and with smoke from the hearth. The planks are not painted. They are bare wood that has been scrubbed with lye and water and sand until it is smooth to the touch. There are pegs driven into the wall near the door, and from these pegs hang a wool cloak and a broad-brimmed hat made of felted beaver fur. The hat has a low crown and a wide brim that is slightly curled from being hung on the peg. The cloak is a dark brown and it hangs in heavy folds that do not move because there is no draught in the room. The door is closed and the latch is dropped into its iron catch. The latch is a simple bar of wood that lifts and falls with a satisfying thunk when it is used. It is not used now. The door will not be opened again until the man of the house returns from the barn after seeing to the animals. You sit and you listen to the quiet. The quiet in a house like this is not empty. It is full of small sounds that you have to learn to hear. There is the sound of the house itself settling on its stone foundation. The timbers of the frame are old oak that were cut from the forest that once stood where the field now stands. The timbers are shaped by an adze, and you can see the faint scalloped marks of the tool on the surface of the summer beam that runs across the ceiling. The timbers expand and contract with the changes in temperature and humidity, and when they move, they make small creaking sounds that are very low and very slow. It sounds like the house is breathing. You have lived in this house long enough that you do not hear the sounds anymore unless you deliberately listen for them. When you listen, you hear a whole world of small noises. The mouse in the wall chinking that scratches very softly as it rearranges its nest of dried grass and wool fluff. The ash in the hearth that shifts and sends a tiny puff of fine grey dust up into the chimney. The wind outside that is not strong enough to be called wind, but is more of a movement of the air that brushes against the oiled paper and makes it flex inward by the thickness of a leaf. Your eyelids feel heavy. The heaviness is not unpleasant. It is the natural weight that comes from sitting still in a warm room with a task completed. You let your gaze rest on the window again. The paper is no longer glowing with the grey light of afternoon. It has taken on a deeper tone that is closer to the colour of pewter that has not been polished. The shapes of the world outside have faded into a single, even darkness. You can see your own reflection faintly in the oiled surface. The reflection is not clear. It is just a suggestion of a face in a white cap and the dark shape of your shoulders. The face has no distinct features. It is only a pale oval floating in the dim glass. You think about the evening that is coming. You will rise from this chair soon. You will bank the fire for the night by raking the coals into a pile and covering them with a thick layer of ash, so they will smoulder slowly until morning. You will light a single candle from the coals, and you will carry it with you as you move through the small rooms of the house. The candle will be made of tallow, and it will have a yellow flame that flickers and smokes slightly and gives off the smell of rendered beef fat. You will walk to the door, and you will lift the latch, and you will step outside for just a moment to look at the sky. The sky will be dark with clouds, or it will be clear with stars. You do not know yet which it will be. You will stand there in the cold air, and you will feel the dampness of the early spring earth under your feet, and you will hear the sound of the brook that runs at the bottom of the slope. The brook is running high now with the meltwater from the last of the snow that still lingers in the shady places under the pines. The sound of the water is a constant low rushing that is always there underneath every other sound. You will listen to it for a count of perhaps 60 slow breaths, and then you will go back inside and drop the latch and return to the warmth of the banked fire. But you are not doing any of that yet. You are still sitting in the chair near the window with your hands resting on your thighs and your eyes looking at the place where the light used to be. The linen shift is folded and the needle is put away, and the only thing left to do in this moment is to sit. So you sit. The room grows darker by slow degrees. The color of the linen thread you were using is no longer visible. It is just a pale line in the grey fabric, and the grey fabric is just a soft shape in the grey room. The smell of the hearth ash and the beeswax and the wool of your skirt all blend together into one smell that is the smell of this house at this hour of the day. You breathe it in and you breathe it out. The air is cool on your cheeks and warm near your body. The crow outside has gone to its roost in the pines. The house settles one more time with a low creak from the summer beam. Everything is very quiet and very still, and the night is coming slowly the way it always comes, in early spring with a long twilight that fades into a deeper and deeper darkness until you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. You close your eyes for a moment. The darkness behind your eyelids is a soft brown color with faint traces of the light from the dying coals still swimming there. You keep your eyes closed, and you listen to your own breathing, and you wait for the evening. You are standing at the threshold of the pantry because it is time to see what remains before the planting season begins. The pantry is not a separate room, but a corner of the keeping room that has been walled off with a partition of vertical pine boards. There is no door on this pantry, only a heavy curtain of wool drugget that hangs from a wooden rod and falls in thick folds to the floor. The curtain is the color of dried blood, and it has been brushed many times to remove the dust, but the fibers have become matted along the bottom edge where feet have brushed against it. You push the curtain aside and it moves with a soft rustle that sounds like the turning of dry leaves on a forest floor. The air inside the pantry is cooler than the air in the main room. It is a still coolness that carries the smells of everything stored within it, and these smells do not move or mingle with the warmer air. They wait for you. The floor of the pantry is packed earth that has been tamped down over many years until it is hard and smooth like the surface of a country road in high summer. The earth is a dark brown color with small flecks of pale straw and chaff that have worked their way into the surface. It is cool under your bare feet because you left your shoes by the hearth, and the soles of your feet can feel the slight dampness that rises from the ground even in early spring. The dampness is not wetness. It is a coolness that reminds you that the frost is only a few inches below the surface, and it will remain there for another month at least. You stand on this cool earth and you let your eyes adjust to the dimmer light. There is no window in the pantry. The only light comes from behind you through the wool curtain, and it is a grey light that falls in a pale rectangle on the floor, and then fades into shadow the farther you look into the space. The first thing you notice is the barrel. It is a barrel made of white oak staves bound with hoops of split hickory that have been shaved smooth and bent into circles. The hoops are held in place by the tension of the wood and by small wooden pegs driven through the overlapping ends. The barrel sits on a low wooden cradle that keeps it up off the earthen floor so the bottom staves do not rot from the damp. The cradle is made of two curved pieces of pine that fit the shape of the barrel, and it is dark with age and with the drippings of brine that have spilled over the rim from time to time. You step closer to the barrel and you place your hand on the lid. The lid is a circular piece of pine that fits snugly inside the top rim, and it has a small hole drilled in the center with a wooden plug shaped like a comb. The wood of the lid is smooth from being lifted and replaced many times. You lift the lid and you set it aside on the floor where it leans against the cradle. Inside the barrel is codfish preserved in salt. The cod came from the waters off the coast near Marblehead, and it was caught the previous autumn and split open and layered in this barrel with coarse grey salt. The salt is not the fine white salt that you use at the table. It is a salt that comes from the evaporation of seawater in shallow pans, and it has a greyish cast and a coarse crystalline texture that feels like tiny pebbles between your fingers. The brine that has formed from the moisture drawn out of the fish fills the spaces between the fillets and rises to within a hand's width of the rim. The surface of the brine is still and dark, and it reflects the grey light from behind you in a wavering oval shape. A ring of white salt crust has formed around the inside of the barrel at the level where the brine meets the air. The crust is rough and crystalline, and it sparkles very faintly in the dimness. You reach into the barrel, and your fingers close around the tail end of a cod fillet. The fish is firm, and the flesh has been transformed by the salt into a dense leathery substance that resists the pressure of your grip. You lift it partly out of the brine, and you see the white flakes of salt clinging to the silver-grey skin. The smell is sharp and clean, and it fills the pantry and then settles back into the barrel when you lower the fish again. You count the fillets by feel more than by sight, because they are layered in a crisscross pattern, and they are all roughly the same size and shape. There are perhaps 24 fillets remaining in the barrel. That is enough to last through the hungry weeks of early spring if you use them sparingly, and if you soak them in fresh water for a full day before cooking to draw out the excess salt. You wipe your wet hand on the front of your apron, and you replace the lid. The wooden plug fits into the hole with a soft thump. Next to the barrel there is a sack of cornmeal. The sack is made of coarse linen that has been washed so many times it has become soft and pliant, and the weave has loosened in places so you can see the pale yellow of the meal through the gaps. The sack is tied at the top with a length of twine made from hemp fibers, and the knot is a simple slip knot that you can undo with one pull. You do not undo it yet. You place your hand on the side of the sack and you press inward. The cornmeal inside gives way under your palm, with a soft yielding that is not like the resistance of the salted cod. It is a dry softness that shifts and settles with a faint whisper. The meal was ground at the mill on the Ipswich River, and it is not a fine flour like wheat flour, but a coarser grind with small hard bits of the corn kernel that the millstones did not completely reduce. You know this texture well. It makes a porridge that has more body than a smooth gruel, and it holds its shape on a wooden spoon. You untie the twine, and you fold back the top of the sack, and you look inside. The cornmeal is a warm yellow color in the dim light with darker flecks of the germ scattered throughout. You push your hand down into the meal and it is cool and dry, and it flows around your fingers like sand on a beach, but finer and softer. You bring a small amount up in your cupped palm, and you let it trickle back into the sack through your fingers. The stream of meal makes a soft hissing sound as it falls, and it leaves a fine yellow dust on the skin of your hand. The sack is still more than half full. It will make many pots of hasty pudding and many loaves of cornbread baked on the hearth. On a shelf above the barrel, there are 3 small pots of rendered tallow. The pots are made of red earthenware with a brown glaze on the inside only. The outsides are unglazed, and they have a rough, sandy texture that feels like the surface of a grinding stone. Each pot holds about a pint of tallow that was rendered from the fat of a steer that was slaughtered in late autumn. The tallow has cooled into a solid mass that is creamy white with a slightly yellowish cast around the edges where it touched the warm clay of the pot. The surface of the tallow in each pot is slightly concave where it shrank as it cooled, and there are fine cracks radiating out from the center like the cracks in dried mud. You lift one of the pots and you feel its weight. The tallow is heavy for its size, and it sits solidly in the bottom of the pot. You tilt the pot and the tallow does not move. It is firmly set, and it will remain so until the warmth of summer softens it. You bring the pot close to your face and you smell it. The smell is faint and clean, with only a trace of the meaty odor that was strong when the fat was first rendered. That odor has faded over the months of cold storage, and now the tallow smells mostly of the clay pot itself. You set the pot back on the shelf, and you make sure it is pushed back far enough that it will not fall if the house settles suddenly. Beside the tallow pots there is a small wooden box with a sliding lid. The box is made of thin pine boards that had been smoothed with a piece of broken glass, and the corners are joined with small wooden pegs. You slide the lid open, and inside there are dried apple rings packed in layers. The apples were sliced crosswise by hand last autumn, and the slices were threaded onto lengths of twine and hung from the rafters near the hearth where the warmth and the moving air dried them slowly over many weeks. Now they are leathery and pliant, and they have shrunk to about half their original diameter. The color of the dried apple rings is a warm brown with patches of lighter tan where the skin of the apple was thinner. You pick up one ring and you hold it up to the gray light from behind you. The light passes through the thin flesh and it glows a translucent amber like the light through a horn window. You bend the ring gently between your fingers and it flexes without breaking. It is perfectly dried. If it were too dry it would snap like a twig, and if it were too moist it would be sticky and would mold in the box. You put the ring back and you run your fingers through the layers to see if there is any sign of mold or any softness that should not be there. The rings shift against each other with a dry rustling sound and they feel uniformly leathery. You slide the lid closed and the sound it makes is a soft scraping of wood on wood. On the floor next to the cornmeal sack there is a crock of salted butter. The crock is a tall cylinder of grey stoneware with a heavy lid that fits over a raised rim. The stoneware is cool to the touch, and it has a smooth glaze on both the inside and the outside. You lift the lid, and you set it aside on the earthen floor, where it makes a small impression in the packed dirt. Inside the crock, the butter is packed tightly, and its surface is covered with a thin layer of salt that you sprinkled there when you packed it down last November. The salt has drawn a small amount of moisture from the butter, and it has formed a crusty white layer that seals the surface. You press your finger into the salt crust, and it cracks and reveals the butter beneath. The butter is a deeper yellow than the butter you churn in summer because the cows have been eating dry hay all winter, and their milk has less of the green grass that makes the butter golden. This butter is the color of pale straw. You scrape a tiny amount onto the tip of your finger, and you taste it. The salt is sharp on your tongue, and then it fades and leaves the clean, rich taste of the butter underneath. It is still good. It will last until the cows come fresh again and the milk begins to flow and you can make new butter. You smooth the salt crust back into place with the flat of your thumb and you replace the heavy lid. The lid settles onto the rim with a soft clunk. Above the butter crock on another shelf there is a row of dried gourds that have been hollowed out and used to store small things. One gourd holds dried beans. You take it down and you shake it gently next to your ear. The beans rattle inside with a sound like rain on a tight cloth roof. They are small white beans that were grown in the garden plots behind the house and then spread on a linen cloth in the sun until they were hard and dry. You pull out the wooden stopper that fits into the neck of the gourd and you pour a few beans into your palm. They are smooth and cool and they have a tiny black eye on one side. You roll them around in your palm and they make a soft clicking sound as they bump against each other. There are enough beans in the gourd for several pots of baked beans with a piece of salt pork and some molasses from the small firkin that sits on the lowest shelf. You pour the beans back and you replace the stopper, and you put the gourd back in its place next to another gourd that holds dried pumpkin seeds for planting. The seed gourd is lighter, and it makes a different sound when you shake it, because the seeds are flat and thin and they rustle like paper. The molasses firkin sits on the floor in the corner where it is coolest. A firkin is a small barrel that holds about 8 gallons, and this one is made of tight-grained oak that does not leak. The molasses inside came from a ship that brought it up from the Sugar Islands in the Caribbean, and then it was carted overland from Boston in a wagon that jolted and swayed over the rutted roads. The firkin has a wooden spigot near the bottom that is turned by a small wooden handle. You kneel down on the cool earth and you place your hand on the side of the firkin. The wood is slightly sticky near the spigot, where small drips of molasses have seeped out and dried into a hard dark glaze. The molasses itself is thick and black, and it moves very slowly when you tip the firkin even a little. You do not open the spigot now. You are only checking to see that the firkin is still sound and that no mice have chewed at the wood. The wood is smooth and unmarked. The molasses will last through the summer and into the next autumn if you use it carefully, a spoonful at a time in the baked beans and in the gingerbread that you make for special occasions. Behind the firkin there is a basket of root vegetables that were dug from the garden before the first hard frost. The basket is a large one made of split ash splints woven in a simple over-under pattern. It sits directly on the earthen floor, so the vegetables can draw up the cool dampness from the ground. You move the firkin slightly to one side so you can reach the basket, and you lift the piece of heavy linen that covers the top. Underneath there are turnips and parsnips and a few carrots that have grown crooked and forked in the stony soil. The turnips are the largest, and they have a purple top that fades into a creamy white bottom. Their skin is smooth and firm, and there are fine root hairs still clinging to the bottom where they were pulled from the earth. You pick one up and you feel its weight. It is heavy and solid, and there is no softness anywhere. The parsnips are long and tapered, and they have a brownish skin that is rougher than the turnip skin. They have been in the ground all winter under a thick layer of straw, and they were only dug up a few weeks ago when the ground began to thaw. The cold has made them sweeter. You know this from past winters. The carrots are small and twisted, and they have a bright orange color that seems almost too vivid in the dim light of the pantry. You put the turnip back and you rearrange the linen cover so it lies flat and keeps the vegetables from drying out. There are perhaps a dozen turnips and 8 parsnips and 5 carrots. It is not a large store, but it will provide a bit of fresh taste in the stew pot for a few more weeks. You stand up slowly, and your knees make a small popping sound from kneeling on the hard earth. The curtain at the entrance of the pantry moves slightly as a draft from the keeping room pushes against it. The grey light shifts and then settles again. You look around the small space one more time, and you see everything in its place. The barrel of cod with its white salt ring, the sack of cornmeal with its soft yielding shape, the pots of tallow and the box of apple rings, the firkin of molasses and the basket of roots. All of these things are quiet and still, and they wait in the cool darkness for the day when you will need them. You notice a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a peg on one of the vertical boards of the partition. The herbs are sage and summer savory tied together with a strip of linen cloth. The bundle is small, and the leaves have faded from green to a dusty grey-green that is almost the same color as the wood behind them. You reach up and you touch the bundle, and the leaves crumble slightly under your fingers. The smell of sage rises up sharp and clean, and it fills the pantry for a moment before settling back into the bundle. This is the last of the herbs from last summer's garden. In a few months, there will be new green leaves to take their place. But for now, these dry leaves will flavor the bean pot and the stew. You take a final slow breath of the pantry air. It is a mixture of many things: the sharp saltiness of the cod brine, the dusty grain smell of the cornmeal, the faint sweetness of the molasses and the dried apples, the earthy smell of the root vegetables and the packed dirt floor. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is the smell of having enough. It is the smell of careful planning and of work that was done in the previous seasons, so that now in the lean weeks of early spring there would still be food on the table. You let the breath out and you turn toward the grey light of the keeping room. Your hand finds the edge of the wall curtain, and you push it aside and you step back into the warmth of the hearthroom. The curtain falls back into place behind you with a soft swish, and the pantry returns to its cool darkness. The barrel and the sack and the crock and the firkin and the basket all sit in the quiet, and they will continue to sit there through the afternoon and through the evening and through the night. The temperature in the pantry will drop a few more degrees as the outside air cools. The salt ring on the barrel will grow by an imperceptible amount. A single dried apple ring will shift in its box as the wood contracts. And all of these things will happen without anyone watching and without any sound except the tiny creaks of a house settling into the spring night. You walk across the keeping room to the hearth where the fire is still burning low. You take the wooden peel from its hook and you push the coals into a pile at the back of the fireplace. You add a single piece of dry oak from the woodbox and you watch as the flames begin to lick at the bark. The light in the room changes from grey to a warm orange, and the shadows move on the walls. You stand there for a moment with your hands held out toward the warmth. The pantry inventory is complete. You know what you have, and you know what will last, and you know that tomorrow you will open the curtain again and take out what you need for the day's cooking. But for now you stand by the fire, and you feel the warmth on your face, and you listen to the small sounds of the burning wood. You step outside the house through the door that faces east toward the common field. The door is made of 2 vertical planks of pine held together by horizontal battens on the inside, and it swings on iron strap hinges that have been hammered out by a smith in Salem town. The hinges make no sound because you have greased them with a bit of tallow, and they move smoothly when you push. The air outside is different from the air inside. It is cooler by several degrees, and it carries a dampness that settles on your cheeks and on the backs of your hands. The dampness is not rain, and it is not mist exactly. It is the exhalation of the earth as the frost leaves it and the water rises into the air in invisible threads. You can feel it in your nose when you breathe in. The air smells of wet soil and of the sheep that are kept in a fold on the far side of the common, and of the smoke from your own chimney that drifts sideways in the still air and then dissipates into the grey sky. The path from your door to the common field is not a constructed path. It is a track that has been worn into the ground by the passage of feet over many years. The grass that once grew there has been pressed down and broken and replaced by packed earth that is darker than the surrounding turf. In the dry months of summer, this track is hard and it rings slightly under a heel. Now in early spring, it is soft. The surface of the track has thawed to a depth of perhaps 2 fingers, and underneath that the frost still holds the ground firm. Your shoes sink into the softened top layer with each step. The shoes are made of cowhide with a thick sole that has been stitched with waxed linen thread, and the leather is dark brown and supple from many applications of neat's foot oil. They are not wet through yet because the oil repels the surface moisture. But you know that if you walk all the way to the far end of the field and back, the damp will eventually seep in, and your stockings will feel cool against your toes. You do not mind this. It is a familiar feeling. You walk with a slow, steady pace. There is no reason to hurry. The crows will still be there whether you arrive now or in half an hour, and the fence posts will still be leaning and the mud will still be mud. Your feet find the places on the track that are slightly higher where the water has drained away into the lower spots. You do not think about this consciously. Your body knows the path from walking it so many times, and your feet adjust their placement without your mind having to direct them. The hem of your ball skirt brushes against the wet grass on either side of the track, and it gathers a small amount of moisture that darkens the fabric in a line just above the ground. You hold your hands together in front of you with your fingers loosely interlaced. The air is cool on your knuckles. To your left, there is a split rail fence that marks the boundary between the house lot and the pasture. The fence is made of chestnut rails that were split from straight-grained logs with a froe and a wooden mallet. The rails are about 10 feet long and they are stacked in a zigzag pattern that requires no posts and no digging. Each rail rests on the one below it at an angle, and the weight of the rails holds the whole structure together. The wood of the rails has weathered to a silvery grey colour that is almost the same shade as the sky. In places where the bark was left on, there are patches of dark brown, and in places where the wood has been exposed to the weather for many years, there are fine cracks running along the grain. You notice a patch of lichen growing on one of the top rails. The lichen is a pale greenish grey and it has a crusty texture that looks like spilled paint that has dried and flaked. It spreads outward in a circular pattern with a darker center and a lighter fringe. You stop walking for a moment to look at it more closely. The lichen is alive in a slow way that is hard for a person to understand. It grows by fractions of an inch over whole seasons, and it has been on this rail since before you came to this house. It will be here after you are gone. You touch the edge of it with one finger, and the surface is dry and rough like fine sandpaper. The contact does not disturb it. Lichen clings to wood with a grip that is stronger than it looks. You resume walking. The track passes through a low spot where the water from the melting snow has collected in a wide, shallow puddle. The puddle is perhaps 10 feet across, and it is the color of weak tea from the tannin that has leached out of the fallen oak leaves that lie at the bottom. The surface of the puddle is perfectly still, and it reflects the grey sky with such exactness that if you did not know better, you would think the ground had opened up into a hole that went all the way through to another sky. A single blade of last year's grass sticks up through the water in the center of the puddle, and it creates a tiny ripple of distortion around itself. You step around the puddle on the higher ground to the right, where the track widens into the pasture grass. The grass here is matted down from the weight of the winter snow, and it is a pale tan color with green just beginning to show at the very base of the stems. Your shoes press the flattened grass and it makes a soft rustling sound as it bends and then slowly rises again after you pass. Beyond the puddle, the track rises slightly onto a low knoll that gives you a view of the common field. The field is not large by the standards of the farms farther inland, but it is large enough for the needs of the village. It is a long rectangle of land that has been cleared of trees for 2 generations, and the stumps of the original forest have long since rotted away into the soil. The field is bordered on 3 sides by more split-rail fences, and on the far side by a stone wall that runs along the edge of the woods. The stones in the wall are grey and brown, and they are covered with moss on the north-facing sides. They were pulled from this very field by the first man who ploughed it, and they have been stacked into a wall that comes up to a person's waist. The wall is not mortared. It is held together by the weight of the stones and the careful way they are fitted one against the other. In a few places, the wall has slumped where the frost has heaved the ground underneath, and the stones have shifted. But the wall is still a wall, and it still marks the edge of the cultivated land. You stop at the top of the knoll, and you look at the field. The soil is dark brown, and it is bare except for the stubble of last year's corn crop that still stands in uneven rows. The corn stalks are about as tall as your waist, and they are brittle and hollow. The wind has broken some of them, so they lean at sharp angles, and the broken ends are splintered into pale fibers that look like the bristles of an old broom. The leaves that once wrapped the stalks have dried and fallen away, and only the tough outer rind remains. When the wind moves across the field, the stalks sway slightly, and they knock against each other with a dry clacking sound that carries across the distance. It is a sound like small sticks being tapped together very softly and very far away. You listen to it for a while. The wind is not constant. It comes in small breaths that stir the tops of the stalks and then die away again. In the silences between the clacking is deeper, and the whole field seems to hold its breath. You walk down from the knoll toward the edge of the field. The track becomes less distinct here because the grass of the pasture has given way to the ploughed earth of the field margin. The soil sticks to the soles of your shoes in clumps that build up and then fall off as you walk. Each step makes a soft sucking sound as your foot lifts away from the damp ground. You stop at the first fence rail, and you rest your hands on the weathered wood. The rail is cool and slightly damp under your palms. You look out across the rows of corn stubble, and you count them without meaning to. There are perhaps 40 rows running the length of the field, and each row contains many individual stalks. The stalks are spaced about the length of your forearm apart, and they were planted that way by hand last spring, with a hoe and a bag of seed corn slung over a shoulder. You remember the planting, but only as a vague memory of warmth and of the smell of turned earth and of the ache in your back from bending. That was a different season, and it seems far away now. On the far side of the field, near the stone wall, there is a large boulder that the plough has to go around. The boulder is a piece of granite that was left behind by the ice that once covered this whole land. It is roughly the size of a small cart, and it has a rounded shape from being tumbled and scraped over bedrock for countless years. The surface of the boulder is grey, with flecks of black and white, and there are patches of green lichen growing on the top where the rain pools in small depressions. Sitting on the very top of the boulder is a crow. The crow is completely still. Its feathers are black with a faint iridescent sheen that shows blue and purple when the light hits them at a certain angle. The light today is too grey for the sheen to be visible, so the crow looks like a cutout of black paper pasted against the grey sky. It does not move. It does not turn its head. It faces the field, and it watches something that you cannot see. Perhaps it watches for the movement of a mouse in the stubble. Perhaps it is simply resting. Crows rest for long periods without moving, and they seem to be thinking thoughts that are not the thoughts of people. You watch the crow, and the crow watches the field, and nothing moves for a long time. You climb over the fence rail carefully. The rail is about the height of your hip, and you place one hand on the top rail, and you swing one leg over and then the other. The wool of your skirt catches for a moment on a splinter, and you free it with a gentle tug. The splinter is small and sharp, and it has been created by the weather, working on the grain of the wood. You stand now on the field side of the fence, and the ground here is softer than the track because it was ploughed in the autumn and then left to the frost and the snow. The furrows are still visible as long, shallow depressions running the length of the field. The ridges between the furrows are slightly higher and slightly drier. You walk along one of the ridges with your feet placed carefully so you do not step on the fragile corn stalks. The stalks are brittle and they would snap under your weight, and you prefer to leave them standing for the crows and for the wind. You walk perhaps 20 paces into the field, and then you stop again. You bend down, and you take hold of one of the corn stalks near its base. The stalk is dry and light in your hand. You pull gently, and the base snaps free from the roots that held it in the soil. The sound of the snap is sharp and dry, and it echoes very faintly off the stone wall at the far end of the field. You hold the stalk up, and you examine it. The outer rind is a pale tan color, with darker brown stripes where the leaf sheaths were attached. The inside of the stalk is filled with a white pith that is soft and spongy, and it reminds you of the inside of a dried sunflower stem. You break the stalk in half, and the pith crumbles and falls away in small pieces. You let the pieces fall to the ground, and you drop the stalk, and you brush your hands together to remove the dry dust. The crow on the boulder has not moved. You look at it again, and it is still there in the same position. You wonder if it is the same crow that you heard calling from the direction of the field when you were sitting by the window with your mending. It could be the same crow, or it could be a different crow. There are many crows in the village, and they all look very similar to a person's eyes. Perhaps the crows can tell each other apart by small differences in the shape of a beak or the set of the feathers. But to you, they are all the same crow. This crow is silent now. It has made no sound since you arrived at the field. It simply sits and watches and waits for something that will happen or will not happen in its own time. You turn and you look back toward the house. From this distance, the house looks small and quiet. The roof is a dark brown slope of weathered shingles, and the chimney rises from the center with a thin ribbon of smoke that leans slightly to the east. The window where you sat with your mending is a pale square in the dark wall. You cannot see inside the window from here. The oiled paper reflects the grey sky, and it looks like a pool of still water set into the side of the house. The door is closed and the latch is dropped. The house sits on its stone foundation, and it waits for you to return the way it has waited for people to return for all the years it has stood in this spot. There is a comfort in seeing the house from a distance. It looks solid and permanent, and it looks like it will still be there when you walk back across the pasture and open the door and step inside. You walk a little farther into the field, following one of the furrows as it curves gently around the boulder. The crow watches you approach. Its black eye is round and bright, and it reflects a tiny image of the grey sky and the field and your approaching shape. You do not come too close. You stop about 10 paces from the boulder, and you stand still. The crow turns its head slightly to one side so it can look at you with one eye. The movement is small and precise. You and the crow look at each other across the distance, and neither of you moves. The wind stirs the corn stalks, and they clatter softly. A single dried corn leaf that has been trapped against the base of a stalk all winter lifts into the air and tumbles end over end for a few feet before settling back down. The crow blinks once slowly. Its eyelid is a pale grey membrane that moves sideways across the eye. Then the crow lifts its wings, and it drops off the boulder, and it flies away toward the woods beyond the stone wall. The flight is silent. The wings beat several times, and then the crow glides on outstretched wings, and then it beats again. In a moment it is a small black shape among the bare branches of the oaks, and then it is gone. You stand by the boulder now, and you place your hand on the stone. The granite is cold and rough under your palm, and it feels like it has been cold for a very long time. The stone has been in this field since before there was a field, and before there were people to plant corn, and before there were crows to sit on its top. It will be here after the field returns to forest, and after the house falls down, and after everything that you know has changed into something else. You keep your hand on the stone for a count of 30 slow breaths, and you feel the cold seeping through your skin and into the bones of your hand. Then you take your hand away, and you turn, and you begin to walk back toward the fence and the track and the house. The walk back is the same as the walk out, but in reverse. You pass the cornstalks that you broke, and they lie on the ground where you dropped them. You step over the furrows, and you find the ridge where the walking is easier. You reach the fence and you climb over it again, with the same careful motion of one leg and then the other. The splinter that caught your skirt is still there, and you avoid it this time. You walk along the track past the puddle with its still surface that still reflects the sky. The light has not changed, and the puddle looks exactly as it did before. You pass the split-rail fence with its patch of lichen, and you do not stop to look at it again. You walk up the slight rise to the knoll, and you look back once more at the field. The field is empty now. The crow is gone and the boulder is bare, and the cornstalks stand in their rows and wait for the plough that will come in a few weeks when the ground has dried enough to work. You continue down the other side of the knoll toward the house. The house grows larger as you approach. The details of the door and the window and the chimney become clearer. You can see the oiled paper in the window, and the way it is slightly darker in the center, where the smoke from the hearth has deposited a fine film over the winter. You can see the latch on the door, and the way the iron has rusted to a dark brown. You can see the wood pile at the side of the house, with its stack of split oak and its patches of moss. You walk up to the door, and you lift the latch, and you push the door open. The warm air of the keeping room washes over you, and it carries the smell of the hearth fire, and the beeswax and the wool of your own clothing. You step inside, and you close the door behind you. The latch drops into its catch with a soft thunk. The walks of the common field is finished, and the house receives you back into its quiet. The churn stands in the corner of the keeping room near the hearth, where the warmth from the fire will help the cream to sour and then to break. It is an upright churn made of white pine staves bound with 3 hoops of ashwood that have been shaved thin and bent into circles while they were still green. The staves are fitted tightly together so that no liquid can seep through the seams, and they have been sanded smooth on the inside with a piece of pumice stone so the cream does not cling to rough spots. The churn is taller than it is wide, and it tapers slightly toward the top where a round wooden lid fits snugly over the opening. The lid has a hole in the center through which the dasher passes. The dasher is a long wooden pole with a cross-shaped piece of wood fixed to the bottom end. The pole is made of straight-grained hickory that has been rubbed with linseed oil until it is smooth and dark. The crosspiece of the bottom is shaped like a flattened X, and it has rounded edges so it will not scrape the inside of the churn. The top of the pole has a handle that fits comfortably in 2 hands. You have poured the cream into the churn earlier this morning. The cream came from the milk that was set in shallow pans in the cool pantry overnight, so the cream would rise to the surface. In the morning you skim the cream off with a flat wooden skimmer that has small holes drilled in it to let the thin milk drain away. The cream is thick and yellow, and it has been sitting in the churn near the hearth for several hours now, so it is warmed slightly from the cold of the pantry. The warmth is important. Cream that is too cold will not turn to butter easily, and you will be churning for a long time with nothing to show for it. Cream that is too warm will make butter that is soft and greasy, and it will not keep well. The cream in the churn now is just right. You know this because you tested it with your finger. You dipped the tip of your finger into the cream, and you felt the temperature against your skin. It felt cool, but not cold, like water from a spring that has been running over stones in the shade. You position yourself beside the churn. You have moved a small 3-legged stool close to the churn so you can sit while you work. The stool is made of a single round of pine for the seat and 3 legs that are set into angled holes and wedged tight. The seat has been warmed smooth by many hours of sitting, and it has a slight depression in the center where the weight of a person settles. You sit down and you adjust your skirt so it does not catch under the legs of the stool. You place your feet flat on the floor on either side of the churn base. The floor here is wide pine boards that have been scrubbed clean, and they are slightly warm from the hearth a few feet away. You take hold of the dasher handle with both hands. Your left hand is above your right hand on the smooth hickory pole. The wood feels cool at first, and then it warms quickly from the heat of your palms. You lift the dasher up and you push it down. The cross piece at the bottom enters the cream, and the sound it makes is a soft splash. The cream is thick and it resists the passage of the wood. You can feel the resistance through the pole and into your hands. It is not a hard resistance, like pushing against a stone, but a soft resistance, like pushing your hand through deep snow. The cream parts around the crosspiece and then flows back together above it. You lift the dasher again and you push it down again. The motion is slow and steady. There is no need to hurry. The butter will come when it comes, and churning faster will not make it come sooner. It will only make your arms tired more quickly. You establish a rhythm. The rhythm is not something you think about. It emerges from the motion of your arms and the sound of the dasher and the feel of the cream. You lift and you push, and you pause for a heartbeat at the bottom of the stroke, and then you lift again. Your breathing falls into the same rhythm. You breathe in as you lift and you breathe out as you push. The sound of the churning fills the keeping room. It is a soft, repetitive sound that is made of several smaller sounds all happening at once. There is the splash of the cream as the dasher enters it. There is the deeper thump as the crosspiece reaches the bottom of the stroke and the wood meets the thicker cream that has settled there. There is the soft sucking sound as the dasher is pulled upward and the cream tries to hold onto the wood. There is the faint creak of the wooden staves as the churn itself shifts slightly with each stroke. All of these sounds blend together into a single steady noise that is as regular as a heartbeat. You watch the surface of the cream through the small gap between the dasher pole and the edge of the hole in the lid. The cream is a warm yellow color with tiny bubbles on the surface that were created by the first few strokes. The bubbles are small and round, and they catch the light from the hearth and the feath and from the window. Some of the bubbles pop immediately with a tiny wet sound that you can barely hear. Others persist, and they gather together into a thin foam that floats on top of the cream. The foam is lighter in color than the cream beneath it. It is almost white with just a hint of yellow. You watch the foam form and then break apart as the dasher passes through it, and then form again. Your arms begin to feel the work. It is not a sharp pain or a burning tiredness. It is a slow warmth that spreads through the muscles of your shoulders and your upper arms. The warmth is pleasant in the cool room. It is the warmth of movement and of effort that is not too great. You shift your grip on the handle slightly so the pressure is distributed differently across your palms. The smooth wood slides against your skin. You continue to lift and push and lift and push. The sound of the churn does not change. The cream continues to splash and thump and suck, and the bubbles continue to form and break and form again. Time passes. You do not measure it by a clock because there is no clock in the keeping room. You measure it by the number of strokes you have made and by the gradual changes in the feel of the churning. After some hundreds of strokes, the cream begins to feel different under the dasher. It is a subtle change at first. The cream feels thicker than it did before, and the resistance against the downward stroke has increased slightly. This is the cream beginning to whip. The tiny globules of butterfat that are suspended in the liquid are starting to bump into each other and stick together. You cannot see this happening, but you can feel it through the pole in your hands. The splash of the cream has changed too. It is a softer sound now, with less of the high splash and more of a heavy slosh. The foam on the surface has grown thicker, and it holds its shape for longer before the dasher breaks it apart. You continue to churn. The rhythm remains steady. Your mind is not occupied with thoughts of other things. It is occupied with the motion and the sound and the feel of the work. The world outside the keeping room has faded into a grey quiet. The window shows only the unchanging light of an overcast afternoon. The hearth fire crackles softly and sends a small puff of smoke up the chimney when a knot in the wood pops. The cat that belongs to the household is asleep on the hearthstone, with its tail curled around its body and its eyes closed. Nothing moves except your arms and the dasher and the cream in the churn. After another long stretch of strokes, the change becomes more pronounced. The cream is no longer a liquid that parts easily around the dasher. It has become a thick foam that clings to the wood and offers more resistance. You can hear the difference clearly now. The sound is no longer a splash or a slosh. It is a heavy, wet thump as the dasher pushes through the thickened mass. The foam has filled the churn up to a higher level than the liquid cream did because it holds more air. You can see the foam through the gap in the lid, and it is a pale yellow color with a dense, creamy texture. Tiny flecks of a deeper yellow are beginning to appear in the foam. These are the first small grains of butter that have formed and separated from the buttermilk. You see them appear and then disappear as the dasher churns them back into the foam. You know that soon there will be more of them and they will begin to clump together. You keep churning. The heaviness of the work has increased, but your arms have grown accustomed to the motion and you do not feel the effort as much as you did at the beginning. Your body has settled into the task and it performs the task without your mind having to direct it. The pole moves up and down. The crosspiece moves through the thickening mass. The sound is a steady thump, thump that echoes softly off the walls of the keeping room. The cat's ear twitches once in its sleep, but the cat does not wake. The fire settles with a soft sigh as a log burns through and falls into the ash. Then the sound changes suddenly. It is a change that you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The heavy thump of the dasher in the foam is replaced by a sharper splashing sound. The butter has broken. The solid mass of butterfat has separated from the thin liquid buttermilk, and now the dasher is moving through a mixture of solid lumps and watery liquid. The sound is unmistakable. It is the sound of water being splashed with a stick, and underneath that sound there is the softer sound of the solid butter lumps bumping against the wood. You look through the gap in the lid, and you see the buttermilk swirling around the dasher. It is a thin, bluish-white liquid that looks very different from the thick yellow cream you started with. Floating in the buttermilk are lumps of butter. They are small at first, about the size of peas and beans, and they are a rich golden yellow color. As you continue to churn more slowly now, the small lumps bump into each other and they stick together, and they form larger lumps. You see a lump the size of a walnut roll past the gap, and then another lump the size of a hen's egg. You stop churning. You lift the dasher out of the churn and you hold it over the opening so the buttermilk can drain back down. The dasher is coated with a thin film of buttermilk and small flecks of butter cling to the crosspiece. You set the dasher aside on a clean linen cloth that you have placed on the floor for this purpose. The cloth will catch any drips and it can be washed later. You take the lid off the churn and you set it aside as well. The inside of the churn is filled with a cloudy liquid and floating masses of yellow butter. The smell that rises from the churn is sweet and clean with a faint sourness that comes from the ripened cream. It is the smell of fresh butter, and it fills the keeping room and mingles with the smell of the hearth and the wool and the beeswax. You fetch a large wooden bowl from its place on the shelf. The bowl is made of a single piece of maple burl that has been hollowed out and smoothed. It is round and shallow with a wide flat bottom and curved sides. The wood has a beautiful grain that swirls around the bowl in patterns that look like flowing water. You have had this bowl for many years, and it has been used for making butter so many times that the wood has absorbed the butterfat, and it has a soft sheen even when it is dry. You set the bowl on the floor next to the churn. You also fetch a wooden paddle that is used for working the butter. The paddle is a flat piece of wood with a handle at one end, and it is about the length of your forearm. It has been smoothed by use, and it is slightly greasy to the touch from the butterfat that has worked into the grain. You reach into the churn with both hands. The buttermilk is cool on your skin. Your fingers find the lumps of butter, and you gather them together into a single mass. The butter is soft and pliable, and it yields to the pressure of your hands. You lift the mass out of the buttermilk and you place it in the wooden bowl. It is a beautiful golden color, and it glistens in the light from the hearth. You reach back into the churn, and you find the smaller bits of butter that have escaped your first gathering. You collect them all, and you add them to the mass in the bowl. Then you take the bowl and you carry it to the table where you have placed a pitcher of cool well water. You pour some of the well water into the bowl. The water is cold from the deep ground, and it makes your fingers ache slightly when you touch it. You begin to work the butter with the wooden paddle. You press the mass of butter against the side of the bowl, and you fold it over onto itself, and you press it again. The motion is slow and methodical. As you work the butter, the water in the bowl becomes cloudy. The cloudiness is the buttermilk that was trapped inside the butter mass being released into the water. You pour off the cloudy water, and you add fresh cool water, and you continue to work the butter. You repeat this process several times. Each time the water becomes a little less cloudy. Each time the butter becomes a little firmer and a little more cohesive. The smell of the butter changes too. The faint sourness of the buttermilk fades away, and the clean, sweet smell of pure butterfat becomes stronger. You work the butter until the water remains clear. This takes some time. You do not hurry. You press and fold and press and fold. The paddle makes a soft, squelching sound as it moves through the butter. Your hands are cold from the well water, but the work of pressing the butter warms them again. The butter is now a single, smooth mass that holds its shape. It is firm but not hard, and it has a slight springiness when you press it with your finger. You lift the mass of butter out of the bowl, and you place it on a clean linen cloth that is spread on the table. You pat the surface of the butter dry with the cloth. The butter is a rich golden color, and it shines softly in the dim light. You take a small amount of fine salt from a wooden salt box on the mantel. The salt is white and crystalline, and it sparkles in the firelight. You sprinkle the salt over the surface of the butter, and you work it in with the paddle. The salt dissolves slightly, and it distributes itself through the butter in tiny grains that you can barely see. The salt will help the butter keep longer, and it will bring out the sweet flavor of the cream. You work the butter a few more times to make sure the salt is evenly mixed, and then you shape the butter into a neat round with a flat top and bottom. The round is about the size of a large apple. You take a small stoneware crock from the shelf, and you place the butter inside. The crock is just the right size to hold this amount of butter with a little space at the top. You press the butter down so it fills the crock completely, and you smooth the surface with the back of a spoon. Then you sprinkle a thin layer of salt over the top to seal it. The salt will draw a small amount of moisture from the butter, and it will form a crust that keeps the air out. You put the lid on the crock, and you set the crock on the pantry shelf next to the other crock of butter from the previous churning. The new butter will be used after the older butter is finished. You clean up the things you have used. You pour the buttermilk from the churn into a smaller crock. The buttermilk will be used for baking or for drinking or for feeding to the pigs. It is a pale bluish color, and it smells faintly sour, and it is full of small flecks of butter that you will strain out later. You rinse the churn with cool water, and you set it upside down on a cloth to drain. You wash the dasher and the bowl and the paddle, and you dry them with a clean cloth. You hang the dasher on its peg near the churn. You put the bowl and the paddle back on their shelves. You wipe the table and you rinse your hands in a bucket of water by the door. The keeping room is quiet again. The churning is finished. The butter sits in its crock in the cool pantry, and it will wait there until someone spreads it on a piece of cornbread or melts it into a pot of beans. Your arms feel slightly tired in a pleasant way. The muscles have been used and now they are resting. You sit down on the stool by the hearth and you stretch your arms out in front of you. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals that glow orange and red. You look at the churn standing in the corner. It is empty now and clean, and it waits for the next time you will fill it with cream. The next time will be in a few days, when the pans of milk in the pantry have given up their cream again. But that is in the future, and right now there is only the quiet of the keeping room, and the warmth of the coals and the soft sound of the cat breathing in its sleep. You step outside through the door that faces the side of the house where the woodpile stands. The door is the same one you have used many times today, and the latch lifts with the same familiar motion and the hinges move without sound. The air outside has not changed since you walked the common field. It is still cool and damp, and it carries the smell of wet earth and distant sheep, and the faint trace of your own chimney smoke that hangs in a thin haze near the roof. The light is the same grey light that has filled the day from morning until now. It is a light without shadows because the clouds are thick and even, and they diffuse the sun into a soft illumination that comes from everywhere at once. You stand for a moment on the flat stone that serves as a step, and you let your eyes adjust to the brightness of the outdoors after the dimness of the keeping room. The brightness is not strong, but it is brighter than the hearth-lit room, and your pupils contract slowly. The woodpile is on the north side of the house, where the sun does not reach in the winter months. This placement keeps the wood from drying too quickly and cracking in the summer heat, but it also means that the north side of the pile stays damp longer into the spring. The pile is not a single stack, but a long row that runs from the corner of the house to the edge of the kitchen garden. It was built in the late autumn when the days were short and the air had a bite to it, and the man of the house spent several days splitting and stacking the wood that would see the family through the cold months. Now in early spring, the pile has dwindled. What was once a wall of wood taller than a person and as long as the house itself is now a low, uneven row that comes up only to your waist. The top logs were burned in January when the snow lay deep on the ground and the wind found every crack in the chinking. The middle logs were burned in February when the cold settled into the stones of the foundation and the hearth fire was kept going day and night. Now in March, only the bottom layer remains, along with a few odd pieces that were too crooked or too large to fit easily into the fireplace and were set aside. You walk across the packed earth between the door and the woodpile. The earth here is bare of grass because feet have walked over it so many times and because the woodpile has shaded it from the sun. It is dark brown and it has a slight springiness from the frost that is still leaving the ground. Your shoes make soft impressions in the soil, and you leave a trail of footprints behind you that will remain until the next rain washes them away. You stop at the edge of the woodpile and you look at what remains. The wood in the pile is mostly oak, with some pieces of beech and a few sticks of birch that were cut from a tree that fell in the pasture 2 summers ago. The oak is the best firewood. It burns slowly and evenly, and it produces a steady heat that lasts through the night. The logs have been split into quarters and sixths depending on the size of the original round. The split faces are a pale tan color, where the axe blade exposed the inner wood, and these faces have weathered over the winter to a slightly grayish tan. The bark side of each piece is dark and rough with deep furrows that run vertically along the length of the log. The furrows are characteristic of oak bark, and they create a pattern of ridges and valleys that catches the light and the shadow in a way that is pleasing to look at. You reach out and you run your fingers along one of the furrows. The bark is hard and it has a corky texture that yields slightly under pressure but does not break. Small pieces of dried lichen are embedded in the crevices and they crumble when you touch them. The lichen on the oak bark is of several different kinds. You have noticed this before, but you have never taken the time to look closely. Now you have time. The afternoon is long and the fire will not be needed for several hours yet. You can stand here and look at the lichen, and no one will call you away, and no task is more urgent than this one. You lean closer to one of the oak logs and you examine the patches of growth that have colonized the north-facing side of the bark. The largest patch is a pale silvery green color that is almost the same shade as the gray sky reflected in a puddle. It spreads across the bark in a circular pattern with a slightly raised outer edge and a flatter center. The texture of this lichen is crusty and it adheres so tightly to the bark that you cannot lift it with your fingernail without breaking it. It has been growing on this log for several years, judging by the size of the circle. The log was cut last autumn, but the lichen was already on the tree when it was felled, and it has continued to live on the bark even after the tree was cut and split and stacked. Lichen does not die quickly. It goes dormant when it is dry, and it revives when the rain wets it again. This patch of lichen is dormant now. It is dry and brittle, and it has no color other than the pale silvery green. In a week or two, when the spring rains come more regularly, it will soften and darken, and it will begin to grow again by fractions of an inch. Beside the silvery lichen, there is another kind that is a deeper gray with a tinge of blue. This lichen is not flat like the first one. It has a ruffled appearance with small lobes that overlap each other like the petals of a tiny flower made of stone. The edges of the lobes curl upward slightly, and the underside is black. You lift one of the lobes with the tip of your finger, and you see the black underside and the way it contrasts with the pale upper surface. This lichen is not as tightly attached to the bark, and you can peel a small piece away if you are careful. You do not peel it. You let the lobe fall back into place, and it settles against the bark with a softness that you feel more than hear. This lichen is also dormant, and it will also revive with the spring moisture. It grows even more slowly than the crusty kind. The patch you are looking at is about the size of your thumbnail, and it has probably taken several years to reach that size. Lichen measures time in a way that is different from the way people measure time. A year to a lichen is like a day to a person. The lichen on this log was growing on the tree when you first came to this house, and it will be growing on the log when the log is finally burned next winter and turned to ash. You move along the woodpile to a section where the bark is different. This is a piece of beechwood that still has its smooth grey bark attached. Beech bark is not rough like oak bark. It is smooth and thin, and it has a silvery grey colour that looks almost metallic in certain lights. The bark on this piece is marked with small dark lenticels that are the breathing pores of the tree. They are arranged in horizontal lines, and they give the bark a speckled appearance. There is a different kind of lichen growing on the beech bark. It is a pale greenish-white powder that looks like flour dusted onto the surface. This is a crustose lichen that is so thin it seems to be part of the bark itself. You touch it and it comes off on your finger as a fine dust. It has no thickness that you can feel. It is just a stain on the surface of the bark. This kind of lichen grows even more slowly than the others. It spreads by fractions of a fraction of an inch, and a patch the size of your hand might be older than you are. You straighten up and you look at the woodpile as a whole. It is a long, low row of brown and grey and tan shapes with patches of green and silver scattered across the surfaces. The logs are stacked in a way that allows air to circulate between them so they will dry properly. Each log rests on the logs below it, with small gaps where the irregular shapes do not meet perfectly. In these gaps there are spider webs that were spun in the autumn and have collected dust and small bits of bark over the winter. The webs are empty now. The spiders that made them are dead or dormant in cracks in the house foundation. The webs sag slightly under the weight of the dust, and they tremble when a breath of wind passes through the woodpile. The wind today is very light. It comes from the east in small puffs that you can barely feel on your cheek. When a puff reaches the woodpile, the spider webs sway and then settle back into stillness. You notice the moss growing on the north side of the bottom logs where they touch the ground. The moss is a different shade of green from the lichen. It is a deeper, richer green, with a velvety texture that looks soft even from a distance. You kneel down on the packed earth to look at the moss more closely. The earth is cool and slightly damp through the wool of your skirt. You do not mind the dampness. You are focused on the small world at the base of the woodpile. The moss forms a dense cushion that covers the end of a log that has been sitting on the ground all winter. The individual plants are tiny, and they stand upright like a miniature forest of soft green stems. Each stem has tiny leaves arranged around it in a spiral pattern. When you look very closely, you can see that the leaves are slightly translucent, and they have a fine network of veins that carry water from the damp ground up into the plant. The moss is alive and actively growing even now in the cool spring weather. It does not go dormant like the lichen. It takes advantage of every day above freezing to add a tiny amount of new growth. You touch the moss with one finger and it is soft and cool and slightly moist. It springs back when you remove your finger, leaving no mark of your touch. There is another kind of moss growing on a different log a few feet away. This moss is not a cushion, but a flat, creeping film that spreads across the surface of the bark. It is a darker green, almost black in the shadows, and it has a glossy appearance as if it has been varnished. This is a liverwort rather than a true moss, but you do not know the name for it. You only know that it looks different and it feels different. When you touch it, the surface is smooth and slippery like wet leather. It clings so tightly to the bark that you cannot lift it. This plant is even older than the cushion moss, judging by the size of the patch. It has been growing on this log for many seasons, spreading outward a tiny amount each year. The edge of the patch is a thin green line that is barely visible against the dark bark. This is where the new growth is happening. The cells at the very tip of the patch are dividing and extending and colonizing new territory at a pace that is too slow for a person to watch. If you were to mark the edge with a scratch and come back in a month, you might see a difference of a hair's breadth. That is the speed at which this plant lives. You stand up slowly, and your knees make a small sound from kneeling on the hard ground. You brush the bits of earth from the front of your skirt. The earth is dry and it falls away easily, leaving only a faint smudge that will brush off when it is fully dry. You look at the woodpile again and you think about which pieces to take inside. The fire tonight will need perhaps 4 or 5 good logs to keep the keeping room warm through the evening and into the night. The morning fire will need more, but you will fetch those in the morning. For now you only need enough for the evening. You walk along the length of the woodpile and you examine each piece. You're looking for logs that are the right size to fit into the fireplace. The fireplace opening is not large and some of the pieces in the pile are too long and would stick out into the room. Those pieces were set aside when the pile was built, and they will need to be cut shorter before they can be burned. You leave them where they are. You are looking for pieces that are dry but not too dry. Wood that is too dry burns too quickly and gives off less heat. Wood that is too wet hisses and steams and does not burn well at all. The wood in this pile has been seasoning for 6 months or more, and most of it is at the right stage of dryness. You can tell by the weight of a piece when you lift it. A dry log feels lighter than a wet log of the same size because the water has evaporated from the cells. You pick up a piece of oak that is about the length of your forearm, and you feel its weight. It is solid, but not heavy. It has a good heft to it. You tap it with your knuckle and it makes a hollow ringing sound that tells you it is ready to burn. A wet log would make a dull thud. You select this piece and you set it aside on the ground near the door. You continue along the piles, selecting one piece after another. You choose a piece of beech that is straight and true with no large knots. Beech burns with a bright flame and it gives off a pleasant smell that is faintly sweet. You choose another piece of oak that is a bit larger and will burn slowly through the middle of the evening. You choose a piece of birch that still has its white papery bark attached. The birch bark will catch fire quickly and help the other logs ignite. You choose one more piece of oak that is smaller and will fit on top of the coals later in the night. You carry the wood into the house in 2 trips. The first trip you take 3 pieces cradled in your arms against your chest. The bark is rough against the wool of your bodice and it leaves small bits of itself clinging to the fabric. You step up onto the flat stone and you push the door open with your shoulder. And you walk to the hearth. You set the wood down in the wood box that sits beside the fireplace. The wood box is a simple rectangular container made of pine boards with a hinged lid that is currently open. The inside of the box is dark and it smells of dry wood and a faint trace of the resin that seeped from a pine knot in one of the previous loads. You place the 3 logs carefully in the box, arranging them so they lie parallel to each other. They fit neatly with a small space left for the remaining pieces. You go back outside for the second trip. The air feels cooler now because you are standing near the warm hearth. You pick up the remaining 2 pieces and you carry them inside. The birch log is light and the white bark peels slightly at the edges where your fingers grip it. You add these pieces to the wood box and now the box is full enough for the evening. You close the lid and it falls with a soft clatter of wood on wood. The firewood is inside and it will warm gradually from the heat of the room so that when you place it on the coals later, it will catch more easily. You return to the door and you stand in the opening looking out at the woodpile one more time. The light is beginning to change now. It is still grey, but it has taken on a slightly deeper tone that signals the approach of evening. The woodpile sits quietly against the side of the house. The lichen and the moss and the spiderwebs are all exactly as they were. They will remain there through the night and through the night's day and through the next rain. The wood that remains in the pile will wait until it is needed. Some of it will be burned before the spring is over. Some of it will last into the summer when fires are only lit for cooking, and then only a small amount at a time. By autumn the pile will be gone entirely, and a new pile will take its place, made from the trees that are standing now in the woods beyond the stone wall. The lichen that is growing on the current logs will burn in the hearth, and its years of slow growth will turn to ash, and rise up the chimney and scatter on the wind. That is the way of things. The lichen does not know this, and it does not care. It only grows while it can in the cool damp air on the north side of the woodpile. You close the door and you drop the latch. The keeping room is warm and quiet. The cat has shifted in its sleep, and now it lies on its other side with its paws tucked under its chest. The fire is a bed of coals that glows softly. The woodbox sits beside the hearth with its load of oak and beech and birch, waiting for the evening. You walk to the window and you look out through the oiled paper at the grey sky. You cannot see the woodpile from this window, but you know it is there around the corner of the house with its lichen and its moss and its patient waiting. You stand there for a while with your hands resting on the sill, and you watch the light drain slowly from the sky. The day is ending and the night is coming, and the woodpile will keep its silent watch through the darkness, just as it has through all the nights of the winter. You turn away from the window, and you go to sit in the chair near the hearth. The room is still. The house settles with a soft creak. You wait for the time when you will open the wood box and select the first log of the evening and place it on the coals. The fire in the hearth has been rebuilt for the evening. You placed the birch log on the coals first because its papery bark catches quickly and the flame it produces is bright and eager. The birch bark curled and blackened and sent up a thin ribbon of white smoke that smelled of wintergreen, and then the flame caught and spread along the length of the log. You added a piece of beech and then a piece of oak, and now the fire is established. It burns with a steady murmur of sound that fills the keeping room without being loud. The flames are yellow and orange with touches of blue at the base where the heat is most intense. They rise and fall in a rhythm that has no pattern you can discern, but that feels regular nonetheless. The light from the fire pushes back the darkness that is gathered in the corners of the room, and it makes the familiar objects of the keeping room visible in a new way. During the day, the light from the window shows everything in grey tones with sharp edges. The firelight shows everything in warm tones with soft edges that shift and waver as the flames move. You are sitting in the chair near the hearth with your mending put away and your hands empty. The evening meal is finished and the wooden bowls have been wiped clean and stacked on the shelf. The keeping room is tidy and quiet. The cat has moved from the hearthstone to a spot under the table where it is warmer and more protected from any stray sparks that might pop from the fire. You are not doing anything in particular. You are sitting and you are looking at the things in the room, and you are letting your mind rest. Your eyes fall on the pewter plate that sits on the mantel. The plate is not a special plate. It is one of several that the household owns, and it is used for everyday meals. Pewter is a soft metal made mostly of tin, with a small amount of copper and antimony to make it harder. It has a low melting point, and it can be dented easily if it is dropped, but it is durable enough for ordinary use, and it does not rust like iron. The surface of the plate is not shiny like silver. It has a soft luster that is often described as a satin finish. When the plate is newly polished, it gleams with a warm grey-white glow. When it has been used for a while and has not been polished, it develops a patina of darker grey that is almost blue in certain lights. This plate has not been polished in several weeks. It has a soft patina that gives it a quiet dignity. You look at the plate and you notice that it is reflecting the firelight. The surface of the pewter is slightly convex, so the reflection it creates is not a sharp mirror image, but a soft, distorted version of the room. The fire itself appears as a bright oval of orange and yellow that moves and changes shape as the flames flicker. The oval is not centered on the plate. It is off to one side because the plate sits at an angle on the mantel. The rest of the plate's surface reflects the darker parts of the room. You can see the curve of the hearth crane as a dark crescent shape against the warmer glow of the firelight. The crane is made of iron, and it has a hook that hangs down into the fireplace. In the reflection, the crane looks softer than it does in reality. The hard edges of the iron are blurred into gentle curves by the imperfect surface of the pewter. You continue to look at the plate and you begin to see other things in the reflection that you had not noticed at first. There is the outline of a chair back. It is the chair that sits on the other side of the hearth facing yours. The chair is empty, and its back is a series of vertical spindles that appear in the reflection as a row of dark vertical lines against a lighter background. The lines are not straight. They waver slightly because the pewter surface is not perfectly flat. The wavering gives the reflection a dreamlike quality, as if you are seeing the room through a thin layer of moving water. The flames shift and the reflection shifts with them, and the vertical lines of the chair back seem to sway gently even though the chair itself is perfectly still. You rise from your chair slowly and you walk to the mantel. The floorboards make a soft sound under your weight. You stop in front of the plate and you look at it from a closer distance. From here the reflection is different. You can see your own shape now blocking part of the firelight. Your reflection is a dark silhouette without distinct features. You see the rounded shape of your cap and the slope of your shoulders and the outline of your head. The edges of your silhouette are soft, and they blend into the darker background of the room. You raise one hand and you see the shape of your hand appear in the reflection as a darker shadow against the glow of the fire. You move your hand slowly, and the reflection moves with it. The motion is smooth and silent. You notice a smudge on the surface of the plate. It is a small mark near the rim that you had not seen from your chair. The smudge is probably from a finger that touched the plate after handling a piece of buttered bread. It is a faint, greasy mark that catches the light differently from the clean metal around it. You take a scrap of wool cloth from your apron pocket. The cloth is a piece of an old blanket that was too worn to mend and has been cut into squares for cleaning and polishing. The wool is soft from many washings, and it has a slightly oily feel from the lanolin that remains in the fibers. You breathe on the plate to create a fine film of moisture. Your breath fogs the surface for a moment and then begins to clear from the edges inward. You rub the smudge with the wool cloth using small circular motions. The wool catches on the metal with a faint squeaking sound that is very soft. The smudge begins to fade. You breathe on the plate again and you continue to rub. The circular motion of your hand is steady and slow. You watch the smudge disappear and you watch the luster of the pewter return to that spot. The metal beneath the smudge is slightly brighter than the metal around it because you have polished away a tiny amount of the patina. The bright spot catches the firelight and gleams with a warmer tone. You continue to polish the entire surface of the plate, even though only the one smudge needed attention. There is no hurry. The evening is long and the fire is warm and the motion of polishing is calming. You breathe on the plate section by section and you rub with the wool cloth. The faint squeaking sound continues, and it blends with the murmur of the fire. The surface of the plate gradually becomes more uniform in its luster. The patina is not completely removed because you are not using a polishing compound like fine ash or chalk. You are only removing the topmost layer of tarnish and smoothing the surface. The plate takes on a soft glow that is very pleasing to look at. The reflection in the metal becomes slightly sharper. The flames in the reflection have more distinct edges now. The chair spindles are clearer. Your own reflection is still soft, but you can almost see the outline of your cap against your hair. You stop polishing and you hold the plate in both hands. The metal is cool against your palms. It has a substantial weight that feels good in your hands. You tilt the plate slowly from side to side, and you watch the reflection of the room slide across the surface. The firelight moves first, and then the dark shapes of the furniture follow. It is like watching a slow dream of the room you are standing in. The plate shows you a version of the keeping room that is familiar but slightly altered. The colors are warmer and the edges are softer, and everything is slightly curved because of the convex shape of the plate. You can see the whole room in miniature if you hold the plate at the right angle. The hearth is a bright area at the bottom of the reflection. The mantel is a dark horizontal band above the hearth. The wall is a large area of mid-tone grey, with the dark shapes of the pegs and the hanging cloak and hat. The ceiling beams are faint lines at the very top of the reflection. The window is a pale rectangle on the opposite wall, but in the reflection it appears on the other side, because the plate reverses everything. Left becomes right, and right becomes left. You are used to this reversal from looking in still water and from seeing your reflection in other polished surfaces. It does not confuse you. It is simply the way reflections work. You set the plate back on the mantel carefully. You position it so it sits flat and secure. You step back to your chair and you sit down again. The fire has burned down slightly and the flames are lower now. The birch log has been consumed and only a few fragments of its white bark remain glowing at the edges of the andirons. The beech log is burning steadily with a bright clear flame. The oak log is just beginning to catch and it will burn for a long time. The light in the room has changed because the fire has changed. The shadows are deeper and the highlights are less bright. The plate on the mantel reflects this new light. The reflection is dimmer now and the shapes are harder to distinguish. The plate itself is just visible as a pale oval against the dark wood of the mantel. You sit and you look at the plate and you let your eyes go slightly out of focus. When your eyes are unfocused, the reflection becomes even softer and more abstract. The flames are a blur of warm color. The chair spindles are a blur of dark lines. Your own shape is not visible because you are too far away and the angle is wrong. The plate is simply a soft glow on the mantle that changes very slowly as the fire changes. The changes are so slow that you cannot see them happening. If you look away for a while and then look back, you notice that the reflection is different, but you did not see the moment of change. It is like watching the hour hand of a clock. The movement is happening, but it is too slow for the eye to catch. Your eyelids feel heavy. The warmth of the fire and the quiet of the room and the soft glow of the pewter plate all work together to make you feel drowsy. You do not fight the drowsiness. You let it settle over you like a blanket. You close your eyes for a moment and you see the afterimage of the plate on the inside of your eyelids. It is a pale oval that fades slowly into the darkness. You open your eyes again and the plate is still there on the mantel, exactly where it was. The fire is still burning. The room is still quiet. Nothing has changed. You think about the pewter plate and about the other pewter things in the house. There is a porringer that sits on the shelf with a small handle on one side. There are several spoons with wide bowls and short handles that are worn thin from many years of stirring and scraping. There is a tankard that holds a pint of small beer or cider. All of these things are made of the same soft grey metal, and all of them have the same satin luster when they are polished. They are not valuable in the way that silver is valuable. They are ordinary things that serve ordinary purposes, but there is a beauty in their ordinariness. The pewter has a warmth that silver lacks. Silver is cold and bright and it demands attention. Pewter is quiet and soft and it blends into the background of daily life. It does its work without fuss and it ages gracefully. You think about the person who made the plate. You do not know who it was. The plate has no mark on the bottom that would tell you the maker's name. It was probably made in Boston or perhaps in London and brought over on a ship many years ago. The pewterer would have melted the tin and the copper and the antimony together in a crucible and poured the molten metal into a mold made of bronze or brass. After the plate cooled, it would have been turned on a lathe to smooth the surface and then polished with fine abrasives until it gleamed. The pewterer's hands would have been stained dark from the metal and the polishing compounds. He would have made many plates just like this one over the course of his working life. Each one slightly different because it was made by hand. Each one destined for a different household where it would be used for everyday meals and polished occasionally and passed down to the next generation. The pewterer is long dead now and his name is forgotten, but the plate he made is still here, catching the firelight on a spring evening in Salem Village. The fire settles with a soft sigh. A piece of the beech log has burned through and fallen into the ash below. The flames flicker and then steady themselves. The reflection in the pewter plate flickers in response. For a moment the whole surface of the plate is bright with the orange glow of the fire, and then the flames subside and the plate returns to its soft grey luster. You watch this happen several times over the course of many minutes. Each flicker is slightly different from the last. Each time the plate captures the light and holds it for a moment, and then releases it back into the room. You hear a small sound from the direction of the pantry. It is the rustle of the wool curtain moving in a draught. The draught comes from the chimney, where the warm air rising creates a slight suction that pulls cooler air from other parts of the house. The curtain sways and then settles. The sound is so soft that you might not have heard it if the room were not so quiet. You listen for other sounds. There is the murmur of the fire. There is the creak of a timber in the wall as the house adjusts to the cooling night air. There is the sound of your own breathing, which is slow and even. There is no sound from outside. The wind has died away completely, and the village is silent under the overcast sky. You look at the plate again. The fire has burned down further, and the light in the room is dimmer. The plate is now just a faint pale shape on the mantel. You can barely see the reflection of the flames. They are a dull orange glow that moves slowly across the lower edge of the plate. The rest of the plate reflects the darkness of the room. The darkness is not complete, because there is still the faint light from the coals, but it is deep and soft, and it makes the plate look like a pool of still water in the night. You think about how the plate will look in the morning when the light from the window falls on it. The morning light is grey and cool, and it will make the pewter look different. The plate will seem more blue than grey in the morning light. Now in the firelight, it seems more brown than grey. The metal itself does not change. Only the light changes, and the plate shows you the light that falls upon it. You decide that you will polish the other pewter pieces tomorrow. The porringer and the spoons and the tankard could all use a gentle rubbing with the wool cloth. It is a task that can be done slowly in the afternoon, when the light is good and the house is quiet. You will take each piece down from the shelf, and you will breathe on it, and you will rub it with the cloth in small circles. The faint squeaking sound will fill the keeping room, and the metal will gradually reveal its soft luster. Then you will put each piece back in its place, and you will step back and you will see how the polished pewter catches the light and how it makes the whole room seem a little brighter. It is a small thing, but small things matter in the quiet rhythm of the days. You rise from your chair slowly. Your body is stiff from sitting still for so long. You stretch your arms above your head, and you feel the muscles in your shoulders lengthen. You walk to the hearth, and you take the wooden peel from its hook. You push the remaining coals into a pile at the back of the fireplace. You take a small amount of ash from the pile, and you sprinkle it over the coals to bank them for the night. The ash is fine and grey, and it settles over the coals like a soft blanket. The coals will smoulder slowly under the ash, and in the morning you will rake away the ash and find the embers still glowing underneath. You set the peel back on its hook. You look at the pewter plate one more time before you leave the keeping room. It sits quietly on the mantel, with the faintest trace of firelight still playing on its surface. The reflection is almost gone now. The plate shows only the darkness of the room and the faint outline of the chimney breast above the mantel. It is a peaceful image. It is an image of rest. You walk to the door that leads to the sleeping chamber. You lift the latch, and you step through, and you close the door behind you. The keeping room is empty now, except for the cat under the table and the banked fire and the pewter plate on the mantel. The plate will sit there through the night in the darkness. It will reflect nothing because there is no light to reflect. It will simply be a shape in the dark, holding its own quiet presence. In the morning when you come back into the room and open the curtain and let in the grey spring light, the plate will be there waiting. It will show you the room again in its soft, curved way, and you will see the familiar shapes of the hearth and the crane and the chair backs, and your own face looking back at you. But that is in the morning. For now, the plate rests in the darkness, and so do you. You wake because the quality of the light in the sleeping chamber has changed. The light that comes through the single small window is not the soft grey light of an overcast morning. It is a brighter light with a sharper edge to it, and it falls on the foot of the bed in a pale rectangle that seems almost white. You lie still for a moment under the heavy weight of the wool blankets and the linen sheet. The air in the chamber is cold. You can feel the cold on your face and on your hand that has crept out from under the covers during the night. The tip of your nose is cool to the touch. Your breath makes a faint cloud in the air just above your mouth, and then it dissipates. This is the coldest hour of the day, just before the sun has had time to warm the house. You know without looking that the fire in the keeping room has burned down to ash, and that the stones of the hearth have given up the last of their stored heat to the cold air. You sit up slowly. The blankets fall away from your shoulders, and the cold air rushes in to take their place. You pull a wool shawl that hangs on the bedpost around your shoulders. The shawl is made of the same linsey-woolsey grey as your outer skirt, and it has a fringe along the edges that has become tangled from use. You untangle a strand of the fringe with your fingers without really thinking about it. Your feet find the floor, which is bare pine boards that are cold and smooth. You stand, and you walk the few steps to the window. The window in the sleeping chamber is smaller than the one in the keeping room, and it is set higher in the wall. It is also covered with oiled paper, but this paper is older, and it has developed small wrinkles around the edges where the wooden frame has shrunk over the years. You reach the window and you look at the paper, and you see that it is not the paper that is different this morning. It is what is on the paper. Frost has formed on the inside of the oiled paper during the night. The frost is not a uniform coating like the ice that forms on a puddle. It is a delicate pattern of crystals that has grown across the surface in the hours of darkness. The crystals are white, and they have a feathery structure that catches the early morning light and breaks it into tiny sparkles. You lean closer to the window, and your breath fogs a small circle on the paper. The fog obscures the frost for a moment, and then it clears, and the pattern is revealed again. You reach up with one finger and you touch the frost very lightly. The crystal structure is cold and it has a slight roughness under your fingertip. You do not press hard. You let your finger rest on the surface and you feel the cold seeping into your skin. The frost does not melt immediately from the touch of your finger because your finger is also cold from the night air. It takes several seconds before you feel the faintest moisture forming where your skin meets the ice. You look at the pattern of the frost more closely. It is not random. The crystals have grown in shapes that follow certain rules, even though each individual crystal is unique. At individual crystal is unique. At the bottom of the window near the wooden frame, the frost is thickest. Here the crystals have formed a dense mat of interlocking fronds that look like the leaves of a fern pressed flat against the paper. The fronds are white and opaque, and they overlap each other in layers so that some areas are brighter white than others. The edges of the fronds are serrated with tiny points that branch off at regular angles. You trace the outline of one frond with your eyes following it from the thick base near the frame up toward the center of the window. The frond divides into smaller branches, and those branches divide again into even smaller ones. The pattern repeats at different scales so that a small section looks very much like the whole. This is the way frost grows when the air is still and the cold deepens slowly over many hours. The water vapor in the air inside the chamber condenses on the coldest surface, which is the window paper, and then it freezes into these intricate shapes. Higher up on the window, the pattern changes. The dense fern-like growth gives way to a sparser arrangement of crystals. Here, the frost has formed individual needles that stand out from the paper like tiny spines. The needles are thin and sharp and now spaced farther apart than the fronds below. They point in different directions, some angled upward, some angled to the side. They catch the light individually, and each one sparkles with a tiny point of brightness. You move your head slightly from side to side, and the sparkles shift and change. Some needles flash white for a moment, and then go dark as the angle changes. This part of the frost is more delicate than the lower part. It has a fragile quality that suggests it would be easy to disturb. At the very top of the window near the upper frame, the frost is different again. Here there are only scattered patches of a fine white powder that looks like dust or like the bloom on a ripe plum. This powder is so thin you can almost see the texture of the oiled paper through it. It is the last of the moisture that condensed out of the air, and it froze before it could form into larger crystals. The transition from the dense ferns at the bottom to the sparse needles in the middle to the faint powder at the top is gradual. There is no sharp line where one type of frost ends and another begins. The pattern flows from one form to the next in response to small differences in temperature and humidity across the surface of the window. You notice a place near the center of the window where the frost has formed a shape that looks almost like a flower. A central point has sent out 6 arms of equal length, and each arm has smaller branches growing from it. The arms are straight and they meet at angles that are very precise. This is a single crystal of frost that grew without interference from neighboring crystals. It had space to spread out and it followed the natural geometry of water freezing into ice. The crystal is about the size of a large button, and it is the clearest and most perfect of all the frost on the window. You look at it for a long time. The 6 arms are not exactly identical. One arm is slightly longer than the others. Another arm has a small irregularity, where a dust particle on the paper disrupted the crystal growth. But the overall symmetry is remarkable, and it speaks of the order that exists in the world at a scale too small for the eye to see without the help of the frost. You place your finger on the flower-shaped crystal. This time your finger is slightly warmer because you have been standing in the cold air and your body has generated some heat. The crystal melts under your touch almost immediately. The 6 arms collapse into a tiny droplet of water that sits on the surface of the paper. The droplet is round and clear, and it magnifies the texture of the paper beneath it. You lift your finger and you look at the place where the crystal was. There is nothing there now except the droplet. The perfect symmetry is gone, and it will not return. The conditions that created it were unique to that moment in the night, and they will not be repeated exactly. Tomorrow night there will be new frost perhaps, but it will form different patterns in different places. You turn away from the window and you walk out of the sleeping chamber into the keeping room. The keeping room is cold, but not as cold as the chamber, because the banked coals in the hearth still hold some warmth deep under the ash. You walk to the hearth and you kneel down and you use the wooden peel to rake away the ash from the pile of coals. Under the grey ash, the coals are still glowing, a faint orange red. You see them and you feel a small amount of their warmth on your face. You take a handful of dry splinters from the kindling box and you place them on the coals. The splinters are thin pieces of pine that catch fire easily. You lean down and you blow gently on the coals. Your breath makes the coals brighten, and the splinters begin to smoke, and then a small flame appears. You add a few larger pieces of kindling and then a small dry log from the wood box. The fire catches and grows, and the warmth begins to spread into the room. While the fire is catching, you return to the sleeping chamber to look at the frost again. The door has been open, and the warmer air from the keeping room is beginning to drift into the chamber. You can feel the difference already. The cold has softened slightly. You walk to the window and you see that the frost is changing. The edges of the dense fern shapes at the bottom of the window have become blurred. The sharp serrations are softening and some of the smaller branches have disappeared entirely. The change is happening slowly, but it is visible if you watch carefully. The warmth from your body and from the open door and from the growing fire is traveling through the air and it is reaching the window. The frost is beginning to melt. You watch the melting for a while. It is a quiet process that makes no sound. The ice turns directly back into water vapor in some places and into tiny droplets of liquid water in others. Where the frost is thickest, it melts into droplets that merge together and form larger drops. These drops catch the light and they act like small lenses. Each drop contains a tiny upside-down image of the room behind you. You can see the bed and the door and your own shape reflected in miniature in the curved surface of a water drop. The drop trembles slightly as it grows, and then it becomes too heavy and it slides down the oiled paper, leaving a wet trail behind it. The trail is dark against the pale paper and it marks the path the drop took. Other drops follow the same path drawn by gravity toward the bottom of the window frame. The wooden frame at the bottom is damp now from the water that has collected there. The dampness darkens the wood and makes it look almost black. The flower-shaped crystal that you melted with your finger has not returned. The droplet that replaced it has been joined by other droplets from the melting frost around it. The spot where the crystal was is now just a small wet area on the paper that looks no different from any other wet area. The uniqueness of that particular crystal is lost, and it exists now only in your memory. You think about how many other perfect crystals formed on the window during the night and melted before you woke. Every night of the winter, the frost has grown on this window, in patterns that no one has seen. The patterns form in the dark, and they vanish when the sun rises and the house warms. They are a secret that the cold keeps and then gives up to the air. The light coming through the window is changing too. The sun has risen above the trees to the east, and its light is now falling directly on the oiled paper. The light is still pale and weak because it is early spring, but it has a warmth that was not there before. You can feel the faint heat of it on your face when you stand close to the window. The frost that remains on the paper is melting faster now. The dense ferns at the bottom are almost gone, and only a few patches of white remain. The needles in the middle have softened and collapsed into lines of water droplets that follow the grain of the paper. The faint powder at the top is gone entirely, and the paper there is just its usual pale tan color, with the dark wrinkles around the frame. You place your hand flat on the window paper. The paper is cold and slightly damp under your palm. You can feel the faint warmth of the sun trying to penetrate through. The paper is a barrier between the inside of the chamber and the outside world. It keeps the wind out, and it lets the light in, and it provides a surface for the frost to grow on. It is a simple thing made of plant fibers and linseed oil, but it does its job well. You leave your hand there for a moment, feeling the cold and the damp and the faint sun warmth all at once. Then you take your hand away, and you see the print your palm has left on the paper. The warmth of your hand has melted the last traces of frost in that spot, and the paper there is slightly darker where the moisture has soaked in. You turn away from the window and you leave the sleeping chamber. You walk back into the keeping room where the fire is now burning well. The flames are bright and they cast a warm glow on the walls. The cat has emerged from its sleeping spot and it is sitting near the hearth with its eyes half closed, enjoying the warmth. You go about the morning tasks of filling the kettle and setting it on the crane to heat and measuring out the cornmeal for the morning porridge. But your mind returns to the frost on the window. You think about the way the crystals grew in the dark while you slept. You think about the 6 arms of the flower-shaped crystal and the way they branched with such precision. You think about the thousands of nights this window has seen frost and the thousands of patterns that have formed and melted unseen. Later in the morning, when the keeping room is warm and the porridge has been eaten and the bowls have been washed, you return to the sleeping chamber one more time. The window is completely clear now. All the frost is gone and the paper is dry except for a small damp spot at the bottom corner where the frame meets the paper. The sun is higher and the light coming through the window is bright and clear. You can see the shapes of the trees outside as vague shadows on the paper. The world outside is waking up, and the frost that covered the grass and the bare branches is also melting. The day will be mild for early spring, and by afternoon the ground will be soft, and the mud will be thick on the paths. The frost will return tonight if the sky is clear and the temperature drops. It will grow new patterns on the window while you sleep. Some of those patterns may be as perfect as the flower-shaped crystal, and some may be ordinary. You will not know unless you wake early and look before the warmth of the morning melts them away. But for now the window is clear and the room is bright and the day has begun. You leave the chamber and you close the door behind you. The window waits in the quiet room for the next cold night and the next secret growth of ice. You are standing in the keeping room, looking up at the ceiling because there is something to notice there that you have not paid attention to in some time. The ceiling of the keeping room is not a flat surface of plaster or boards. It is the underside of the floor above, where the sleeping chamber is, and it is made of wide planks supported by heavy beams that run across the width of the room. One of these beams is called the summer beam, and it is the largest piece of wood in the house. It was hewn from a single oak tree that grew in the forest that once covered this land, and it still bears the marks of the adze that shaped it. But you are not looking at the summer beam today. You are looking at the smaller rafters that run between the summer beam and the walls. These rafters are closer together, and they are made of pine, and they have been darkened by years of smoke rising from the hearth. And hanging from these rafters are bundles of herbs. The herbs were gathered last summer, and in the early autumn, when the days were still warm and the plants were at their fullest. You remember the gathering in a general way as a series of warm afternoons spent in the kitchen garden and along the edges of the pasture where wild things grow. You remember the feel of the stems snapping between your fingers and the green smell that rose up from the bruised leaves. You remember tying the bundles with lengths of linen twine and hanging them from the rafters to dry. That was many months ago. The herbs have been hanging here through the autumn and the winter and now into the early spring. They have dried completely in the warm air that rises from the hearth, and they have become different things than they were when they were green and growing. You pull the wooden stool from its place near the hearth, and you position it under one of the rafters. The stool is low, and it gives you just enough height to reach the bundles if you stand on it carefully. You step up onto the stool, and you feel the slight wobble of the uneven legs on the floorboards. You steady yourself with one hand on the summer beam. The beam is smooth and cool under your palm, from years of hands touching it in just this way. You are now close enough to the herbs to see them clearly, and to touch them and to smell them individually, rather than as a general background scent in the room. The first bundle you examine is sage. Sage is a plant with soft grey-green leaves that have a pebbled texture like fine leather. When the leaves were fresh they were pliable, and they released their scent at the slightest touch. Now they are dry and brittle, and their colour has faded to a dusty grey, with only a faint hint of the original green remaining deep in the centre of each leaf. The leaves are attached to woody stems that have also dried and turned a pale tan colour. The stems are stiff, and they hold the leaves out away from the central twine in a spray that has kept its shape even as it dried. You reach out and you touch one of the leaves with the tip of your finger. The leaf is crisp and it crumbles slightly at the edge where your finger meets it. The sound of the crumbling is a very soft rustle, like the sound of a mouse moving through dry grass. The scent of sage rises from the broken edge. It is a sharp, clean smell that fills your nose and then fades, leaving a faint bitterness behind. Sage is for flavoring meat and for making a tea that is said to be good for the throat. You have used it many times in the bean pot and in the stuffing for a roasted fowl. The dried leaves will keep their flavor for a long time if they're kept dry and away from the light. Beside the sage, there is a bundle of rosemary. Rosemary is a different kind of plant entirely. Its leaves are not broad and soft like sage leaves. They are narrow and needle-like, and they grow in dense clusters along woody stems. When rosemary is fresh, the leaves are a dark glossy green on top and a silvery grey underneath. Now they are dried, and their color has become a uniform grey-green that is almost the same as the sage, but with a slightly bluer cast. The needles are stiff, and they do not bend when you touch them. They snap if you apply pressure. You run your finger along the stem and several needles fall away and drift down to the floor. The sound they make when they fall is too soft to hear. The scent of rosemary is different from sage. It has a sharpness that is almost pine-like, but with an undertone of something floral and sweet. The smell stays in your nose for a long time after you've touched the plant. Rosemary is for remembrance, or so the old people say. You put a sprig of it in the pocket of a coat when someone is going on a journey. It is also good with lamb and with roasted root vegetables. The dried needles will soften in a pot of stew and release their flavor slowly over hours of cooking. You move your attention to a bundle that hangs a little farther along the rafter. This is chamomile. Chamomile is not a woody herb like sage and rosemary. It is a low-growing plant with feathery leaves and small daisy-like flowers. What you have hanging here are the flowers, mostly with some stems and leaves still attached. The flowers were picked when they were fully open, and their white petals surrounded a bright yellow center that was rounded and slightly domed. Now the flowers are dry, and they have closed up somewhat. The white petals have turned a pale parchment yellow, and they have curled inward toward the center so that each flower looks like a tiny fist. The yellow centers have darkened to a brownish gold, and they have shrunk so they are concave rather than domed. The flowers are attached to thin stems that have dried to a pale straw color, and they are bundled together with a piece of twine that is tied in a simple knot. You take the bundle gently in your hand. It is very light. The dried flowers rustle against each other with a sound that is higher and thinner than the rustle of the sage leaves. You bring the bundle close to your face and you breathe in. The scent of chamomile is sweet and apple, with a faint hay-like undertone that comes from the dried stems. It is a gentle scent that is said to calm the nerves and to bring sleep. You often put a few dried flowers in a cup of hot water in the evening, and you drink the pale golden liquid before bed. The chamomile has kept its scent well through the winter, and it will last until the new flowers bloom in the summer. Next to the chamomile, there is a bundle of lavender. Lavender is a plant with tall, slender stems that bear spikes of small purple flowers. When it is growing in the garden, the lavender sends up its flower stalks in midsummer, and the bees come and work their way up each spike, visiting every tiny flower. The flowers are a soft purple-blue color that is unlike anything else in the garden. Now they are dried, and their color has faded to a grayish lavender that is more gray than purple. The individual flowers have fallen from the stems somewhat, and there is a small pile of loose lavender buds on the floor directly beneath the bundle. You notice this pile now. It is a tiny mound of grey-purple specks that have accumulated over the months of hanging. Each bud is about the size of a grain of sand, and it has a tiny stem attached to it where it was connected to the flower spike. You reach down carefully while still balancing on the stool, and you pick up a few of the fallen buds from the floor. They are dry and light, and they cling to your finger. You bring them to your nose, and the scent of lavender rises up. It is a clean floral scent with a hint of sharpness that clears the head. Lavender is for keeping moths away from woolens and for scenting the linen chest. You sometimes tuck a small cloth bag filled with lavender buds under your pillow to help you sleep. You stand on the stool and you look at the lavender bundle more closely. The stems are tied together near the base, and the bundle hangs upside down so the flower spikes point toward the floor. This is the way all the herbs are hung because it helps the essential oils flow down into the leaves and flowers as they dry. The stems have turned a pale brown, and they are hollow and light. You touch one of the flower spikes gently, and several more buds detach and fall. They spiral down through the still air, catching the light from the window and the hearth. Each tiny bud turns slowly as it falls, and it glints with a faint purple-grey sheen. You watch one bud in particular as it descends. It falls past your shoulder and past your waist, and it lands on the scrubbed surface of the pine table below. The table is bare except for the usual things, and the lavender bud sits there alone. A tiny speck of color on the pale wood. It will remain there until you brush it away perhaps, or perhaps it will be joined by others and form a small collection that you will gather up and put in the linen chest. You step down from the stool and you walk to the table. You pick up the fallen lavender bud between your thumb and forefinger. It is so light that you can barely feel its weight. You roll it gently and the tiny stem catches on the ridges of your fingerprint. You bring it to your nose again and you breathe in. The scent is faint now because the bud has been handled and some of its oil has transferred to your skin. But it is still there, a ghost of the summer garden in the middle of early spring. You set the bud down carefully on the corner of the table where it will not be disturbed. You return to the stool and you step up again to continue your examination of the hanging herbs. There is a bundle of thyme tied next to the rosemary. Thyme is a low creeping plant with tiny oval leaves that grow in pairs along thin wiry stems. When it is fresh, the leaves are a bright green and they are so small that you need many stems to make a bundle. Now the leaves are dry and they have turned a brownish green. They are so small and so numerous that the bundle looks like a cluster of tiny twigs with a faint dusting of color. You touch the bundle and the leaves fall away in a small shower. They are too small to see individually as they fall, but you hear them patter softly on the floorboards. The scent of thyme is earthy and warm with a hint of something medicinal. It is good in soups and stews, and it is said to be good for the chest in winter. You have used it many times when someone in the house had a cough. Next to the thyme is a bundle of summer savory. Summer savory is a plant with narrow leaves that are softer than rosemary needles, but not as broad as sage. The leaves have dried to a pale greenish brown, and they are attached to stems that have become very brittle. The bundle is smaller than the others because you did not grow as much savory last summer. You touch a stem, and it snaps with a dry crack. The piece that breaks off falls to the floor, and you leave it there for now. The scent of savory is peppery and sharp, and it is often used with beans because it is said to reduce the windy effects of the beans. You do not know if this is true, but you use it anyway because the taste is pleasant. There is one more bundle hanging from the rafter, and it is different from the others. This is a bundle of tansy. Tansy is a plant with fern-like leaves and clusters of small yellow button flowers. It is not used for cooking because it has a bitter taste, and it can be harmful if too much is eaten. But it is useful for keeping away flies and other insects, and for strewing on the floor to freshen the air. The leaves have dried to a dark greenish brown, and the yellow flowers have turned a dull mustard color. The scent of tansy is strong and sharp with a hint of camphor. It fills the space around the bundle, and it mingles with the other herb scents to create a complex smell that is the smell of this house. You touch the tansy bundle, and your fingers come away with a faint residue of the bitter oils. You wipe your fingers on your apron. You stand on the stool for a while longer, looking at all the bundles together. They hang in a row along the rafter, each one slightly different in shape and color and scent. The twine that binds them is the same linen twine that you use for mending, and it is darkened with age and with the absorption of the plant oils. The knots are still tight, even after months of hanging. The herbs have dried slowly in the warm air that rises from the hearth, and the smoke has added its own character to them. They are not the bright green things they were in the garden. They are quiet, brown and grey things now that hold the memory of summer inside their dried tissues. When you crush a leaf or a flower, the scent is released, and for a moment the summer is present in the room. The light from the window falls on the hanging herbs, and it creates a pattern of shadows on the ceiling above them. The shadows are soft, and they move slightly when a draught from the chimney stirs the bundles. You watch the shadows for a while. They shift and sway with a slow rhythm that is calming to watch. The sage shadow is broad and rounded. The rosemary shadow is spiky and sharp. The lavender shadow is a cluster of small dots that merge into a single shape. The shadows are like another version of the herbs, a grey echo on the ceiling that exists only when the light is right. You notice that there is a small spider web connecting the sage bundle to the rosemary bundle. The web is delicate, and it spans the gap of a few inches. The spider that made it is long gone, or perhaps it is hiding in a crack in the rafter. The web has caught nothing but dust, and a few fragments of dried herb leaves that have fallen from the bundles. The dust makes the web visible as a faint grey tracery against the darker wood of the rafter. You do not disturb the web. It is part of the quiet life of the keeping room. You step down from the stool carefully and you push it back to its place near the hearth. You stand in the middle of the room and you look up at the herbs again from a distance. From here, they are just brown shapes against the dark ceiling. You cannot see the individual leaves or flowers. You cannot smell them unless you stand directly beneath them and wait for the warmth of the hearth to release their scent. But you know they are there, and you know what they contain. They are the stored summer, the captured scent of the garden, the medicine and the flavor that will carry you through until the new plants grow again. You think about the work of gathering them. It was done on warm afternoons when the sun was high and the bees were busy and the air was full of the green smell of growing things. You walked along the rows of the garden with a basket on your arm, and you pinched off the tender tips of the sage, and you cut the flowering spikes of the lavender, and you pulled up whole plants of chamomile from the sandy soil. Your hands were stained green and they smelled of whatever herb you had just picked. You brought the baskets into the keeping room, and you sat at the table and you sorted the herbs and tied them into bundles. The bundles were hung from the rafter one by one until the ceiling was festooned with green. Over the following weeks the green faded and the bundles shrank and the scents intensified. By the time the first frost came, the herbs were dry and ready. They have been waiting here ever since. You reach up and you take down the bundle of chamomile because you think you will make a cup of tea this evening. The bundle comes away from the rafter easily. The twine loop slips off the peg and the bundle is in your hand, light and rustling. You carry it to the table and you set it down. A few dried flowers fall onto the table, and you gather them up and put them in a small wooden bowl that you keep for this purpose. You will crumble a few of the flowers into a cup and pour hot water over them and let them steep. The water will turn a pale gold, and the scent of chamomile will rise with the steam. You will sit by the hearth and you will drink the tea slowly, and you will feel the warmth spread through you. That is for later. For now you leave the chamomile bundle on the table and you return to your chair by the window. The keeping room is quiet. The fire murmurs to itself. The cat is asleep under the table. The herbs hang from the rafter in their patient row. They will continue to hang there through the spring and into the summer. When the new herbs are ready to be gathered, you will take down the old bundles and you will crumble the remaining leaves and flowers into the cooking pot or into the linen chest. The bare twine will be saved for another use, and the rafter will be filled with new green bundles. But that is months away. For now, the dried herbs keep their quiet watch over the room, and their scents mingle in the warm air. And another tiny lavender bud detaches from its stem and spirals down to join the first on the corner of the table. You have noticed for some time that one of the baskets in the keeping room has developed a split. The basket sits on the floor near the hearth, and it is used to hold small pieces of kindling and the twists of paper and dry grass that you use to start the fire. It is not a large basket. It stands about as high as your knee, and it is wider at the top than at the bottom with a gentle curve to its sides. The basket is made of ash splints that were pounded from a straight-grained log and then cut into strips of varying widths. The splints are woven together in a simple over-under pattern that creates a sturdy fabric of wood. The bottom of the basket is a separate piece of pine board that fits into a groove carved into the lowest splints. The rim is a heavier splint that is wrapped around the top edge and lashed in place with thin strips of the same ash wood. The split you have noticed is in one of the vertical splints that form the sides of the basket. This splint runs from the bottom rim up toward the top, and it passes over and under the horizontal splints that circle the basket. The split is near the middle of the basket, where the curve is most pronounced, and it is about the length of your longest finger. The wood is separated along the grain, creating a narrow gap that widens slightly when the basket is filled and the sides press outward. The gap is not large enough for the kindling to fall through, but it weakens the basket, and if it is not mended, it will grow longer over time as the basket is used and moved and filled and emptied. Splits in ash wood tend to run along the grain, and they can travel quite far once they start. You have seen this happen with other baskets, and with wooden handles, and with the staves of barrels. It is better to mend the split while it is still small. You pick up the basket and you carry it to the table where the light from the window is good. You turn the basket in your hands, examining the split from different angles. The ash splints have aged to a warm honey-brown color that is darker on the outside, where they have been exposed to the air and the smoke and the touch of hands. The inside of the basket is a lighter color, closer to the pale tan of freshly worked ash. The splints are smooth from use, and they have a slight sheen where the natural oils from many hands have polished the surface. The split is a dark line against the honey-brown wood. You can see the rough edges of the broken fibers, and you can see how the two sides of the split have separated slightly. If you press on the basket from the inside, the split opens a little more, and you can see daylight through it. When you release the pressure, the split closes, but not completely. The wood has taken a set, and it will not return to its original position without help. You set the basket on the table, and you go to the corner of the keeping room, where you keep a small supply of basket-making materials. There is a bundle of ash splints that you prepared last autumn from a log that was cut in the swampy ground near the brook. Ash trees that grow in wet places have long, straight fibers that separate easily when the wood is pounded. You take one of these splints from the bundle. It is about as wide as two of your fingers and as long as your arm from elbow to wrist. The splint is thin and flexible, and it has a smooth surface on one side where the knife followed the grain and a slightly rougher surface on the other side where the wood separated naturally. The color of this splint is a pale cream with faint streaks of brown where the growth rings of the tree are visible. It is much lighter than the aged splints of the basket because it has not been exposed to the air and the smoke. Over time, it will darken to match the rest of the basket. You also need a length of the thin ash strip that is used for lashing. This is called a binder, and it is made by splitting a splint into very thin, flexible strips that are almost like coarse thread. You have a small coil of these binders in the basket-making bundle. They are a pale cream color, and they are so thin that light passes through them when you hold them up to the window. You take a strip that is about the length of your forearm and you set it aside on the table. You will need to soak the new splint before you can work with it. Dry ash is brittle, and it will snap if you try to bend it sharply. Soaked ash becomes pliable, and it can be woven through the existing basket without breaking. You fetch a small wooden bucket from its place by the door. The bucket is made of pine staves bound with iron hoops, and it has a rope handle that is frayed at the ends. You carry the bucket to the water barrel that sits just outside the door, and you fill it about halfway with cool water. The water in the barrel comes from the well, and it is always cool even in summer because the well is deep and the ground keeps it at a constant temperature. You carry the bucket back inside, and you set it on the hearthstones where it will not tip. You take the ash splint and you coil it loosely so it will fit inside the bucket. The splint resists the coiling because it has been stored flat for many months. You do not force it. You bend it gently into a curve that will fit within the circle of the bucket, and you lower it into the water. The splint floats at first because the wood is dry and full of air. You push it down with your fingers and it slowly sinks until it is completely submerged. You place a small clean stone on top of the splint to hold it under the water. The stone is a smooth grey oval that you picked up from the brook years ago, and it has been used for this purpose many times. The water in the bucket is still and clear. You can see the ash splint resting on the bottom with the stone holding it down. The splint looks slightly different under water. The pale cream color becomes more pronounced, and the brown streaks seem darker. Small bubbles of air rise from the surface of the wood as the water penetrates the fibers. The bubbles are tiny, and they rise slowly, and they pop when they reach the surface. You watch them for a while. The soaking will take some time. The water needs to work its way into the cellular structure of the wood and soften the lignin that holds the fibers together. This cannot be hurried. You leave the bucket on the hearth, and you go about other small tasks while you wait. You wipe down the table with a damp cloth. You check the fire and add a small piece of beech. You take down the chamomile bundle from earlier, and you crumble a few more flowers into the wooden bowl for this evening's tea. You fold a dry linen cloth and set it on the shelf. The keeping room is quiet and the light from the window moves slowly across the floor as the sun travels its low spring arc. After a time you return to the bucket and you test the splint. You lift the stone and you take hold of one end of the splint and you bend it gently. The wood yields to the pressure. It bends without cracking, and it feels softer and more pliable than it did before. It is ready. You lift the splint out of the water and you let the excess drip back into the bucket. The splint is darker now that it is wet, and it has a cool, slippery feel. You carry it to the table and you lay it flat on a clean cloth. You also take the thin binder strip and you dip it briefly in the water so it too becomes pliable. The binder softens almost immediately because it is so thin. You set it beside the splint on the cloth. Now you turn your attention back to the basket. You examine the split again to decide how best to mend it. The split runs along a vertical splint that passes over and under the horizontal weavers. You cannot simply replace the entire splint because it is woven through the basket and it would require undoing much of the work. Instead, you will splice a new piece of ash into the gap. You will trim the damaged section of the old splint, and you will weave the new splint into its place following the same over-under pattern. The mend will be visible, but it will be strong, and it will prevent the split from growing. You take a small sharp knife from the mantle. The knife has a bone handle that has yellowed with age, and a short blade that is kept very sharp. You use this knife for many small tasks around the house, and it is well suited to trimming basket splints. You hold the basket steady with one hand, and you use the knife to carefully cut away the damaged section of the vertical splint. You make 2 cuts, one above the split and one below it. The cuts are clean, and they follow the line of the splint. The damaged piece falls away, and you set it aside on the table. It is a small curved fragment of honey brown ash with a dark split running through its center. It is no longer useful, except perhaps as a piece of kindling. The gap in the basket is now a rectangular opening where the vertical splint used to be. The horizontal weavers that passed over and under the old splint are exposed, and they create a pattern of alternating gaps. You will need to thread the new splint through these gaps following the same over-under sequence that the old splint followed. You begin at the bottom of the gap where the old splint emerged from under the bottom rim. You take the wet ash splint and you trim one end to a point with a knife. The point will make it easier to thread the splint through the tight spaces. You insert the pointed end into the gap and you push it gently. The wet wood slides against the dry wood of the existing weavers with a soft, whispery sound. It is a sound like a very quiet sigh made of wood fibers rubbing together. You work slowly and carefully. You thread the new splint under the first horizontal weaver, and then over the next one, and then under the one after that. Your fingers guide the wet ash through the tight spaces. The water on the splint lubricates the passage, and it also dampens the existing weavers slightly where it touches them. This is good because dry ash can be brittle, and a little moisture helps it flex without cracking. You continue threading the splint upward through the basket. Each time you pass over or under a weaver, you pause to make sure the new splint is lying flat against the basket side. You do not want it to twist or bunch. The wet wood is compliant and it takes the shape you give it. When you reach the top of the gap, you have about a hand's length of new splint extending above the basket rim. You trim this excess with the knife, leaving enough to tuck under the rim and secure. You also trim the bottom end that protrudes below the bottom weaver. The new splint is now in place, and it follows the same path that the old splint followed. The mend is strong, but it is not yet finished. The new splint needs to be secured so it does not slip out of position over time. You take the thin binder strip that you soaked earlier. You will use this to lash the new splint to the existing weavers at the top and bottom of the mend. You start at the bottom where the new splint emerges from under the bottom rim. You wrap the binder strip around the splint in the adjacent weaver several times, pulling it snug with each wrap. The wet ash strip is thin and flexible, and it conforms to the shapes of the wood. You tie a small, tight knot, and you trim the excess binder with the knife. The knot is small and neat, and it sits flush against the wood. You repeat this process at the top of the mend, where the new splint meets the top rim. You wrap the binder around several times, and you tie another knot. The knots will hold the splint in place while the wood dries and shrinks. As the ash dries, it will tighten around the binders, and the mend will become even more secure. You step back, and you look at the basket. The new splint stands out against the honey brown of the old basket. It is a pale cream color with faint streaks, and it looks fresh and new. In time it will darken from exposure to the air and the smoke and the touch of hands. It will take on the same warm patina as the rest of the basket. Until then, it will be a visible reminder of this quiet afternoon and this small act of mending. You turn the basket in your hands to examine the mend from all sides. The new splint follows the curve of the basket smoothly, and it lies flat against the weavers. The binders are tight and neat. The gap is closed and the basket is whole again. You press on the inside of the basket where the split used to be, and the new splint holds firm. There is no give and no sign of weakness. The basket will continue to hold the kindling and the twists of paper for many years to come. You set the basket on the floor near the hearth where it belongs. You gather up the scraps of ash from the table, the damaged section of the old splint, and the trimmed ends of the new splint, and the small piece of excess binder. These scraps are dry and light, and they will make good kindling. You place them in the kindling basket, which is the very basket you have just mended. The new splint accepts this small load without complaint. The basket sits quietly on the floor with its fresh mend facing the room. You clean up the work area. You pour the water from the bucket out the door onto the ground where it soaks into the packed earth. You wipe the bucket dry with a cloth, and you hang it back on its peg. You return the knife to the mantel, and you fold the damp cloth and set it near the hearth to dry. You put the remaining ash splints and binders back in their bundle in the corner. The keeping room is tidy again. You sit down in your chair by the window and you look at the basket across the room. It is just a basket, a simple thing made of ash splints woven together, but there is a satisfaction in seeing it whole again. The split that had been growing slowly for months has been stopped. The basket will continue to serve its purpose without complaint. It will hold the kindling and it will sit on the floor, and it will age gracefully along with everything else in the keeping room. The light from the window has begun to change. It is later in the afternoon now, and the grey of the overcast sky has deepened slightly. The basket sits in the soft light, and the new splint catches the light differently from the old ones. It has a faint gleam from the water that is still evaporating from its surface. As it dries over the next hours, it will lose this gleam and it will begin its slow journey toward the honey brown of the rest of the basket. You will watch this happen over the coming weeks and months. You will notice one day that you can no longer tell which splint was mended. The basket will simply be a basket whole and useful and unremarkable. You close your eyes for a moment. The keeping room is warm and quiet. The fire makes its soft sounds. The cat breathes slowly in its sleep. The basket sits on the floor holding the small scraps of ash that were once part of a split and are now waiting to become fire. Everything is as it should be. You let out a slow breath and you settle deeper into the chair. The afternoon stretches on quiet and calm and full of the small ordinary things that make up a life. You are sitting in the chair near the window because it is the end of the day, and this is where you always sit when the work is done and the evening is settling in. The chair is the same one you sat in when you mended the linen shift, and it holds your weight in the same familiar way with the smooth wood of the armrests under your palms and the slight give of the woven seat beneath you. The window is the same window with its oiled paper that has yellowed over time and its wooden frame that has shrunk and left small gaps where the cold air sometimes seeps through, but tonight the air is still and there is no draught. The paper is still and the room is still and you are still. The light in the eastern sky outside the window is changing. It has been changing for some time now, but the change is so slow that you only notice it when you look up after a period of looking away. The sky was a pale grey all day, the same grey that has covered the village for much of this early spring. There were no clouds with distinct edges and no patches of blue. There was only a uniform grey that seemed to press down on the land and soften all the sounds and make the distances seem shorter than they are. Now that grey is deepening. It is not becoming darker in the way that a storm cloud darkens the sky with a sudden shadow. It is fading from within, as if someone is slowly drawing a curtain across the light source behind the clouds. The grey takes on a cooler tone with more blue in it, and then the blue deepens toward a colour that is not quite blue and not quite grey, but something in between that has no name. You watch this change without moving. Your hands are folded in your lap and your breathing is slow and even. The day has been long in the way that quiet days are long. Not long with difficulty or with waiting for something to happen, but long with the steady accumulation of small moments, each one following the last without hurry. You mended the shift, and you inventoried the pantry, and you walked to the common field, and you churned the butter, and you examined the wood pile, and you polished the pewter plate, and you watched the frost melt, and you looked at the hanging herbs, and you repaired the basket. All of these things happened in this one day that is now coming to its close. They have settled into your memory as a series of quiet images with no sharp edges between them. The light continues to change. The eastern sky is darker now than the western sky behind the house. This is the way of evening. The sun sets in the west, but the eastern sky is the first to show the coming night because it faces away from the fading light. It catches the last reflections of the sun off the clouds, and then it lets them go. The color of the eastern sky is now a deep slate blue that is almost the color of the slate shingles on the roof of the meeting house. You have seen those shingles many times and you know their color well. They are a dark blue-gray with a faint sheen when they are wet. The sky tonight has that same quality. It looks smooth and solid, as if you could reach out and touch it and feel a cool, hard surface. Through the oiled paper, the shapes of the outside world are becoming harder to distinguish. The bare branches of the apple tree that stands at the corner of the house have been visible all day as dark lines against the grey sky. Now those lines are fading into the darker background. The tree is becoming a single shape rather than a collection of individual branches. The trunk is a thicker darkness, and the crown is a softer darkness, and the two merge together so that you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The tree is simply there, a presence outside the window that you know is an apple tree because you have seen it in the daylight and you have picked its fruit in the autumn. But in this fading light, it could be anything. It could be a person standing very still, or a large stone, or just a shadow that has gathered in that particular shape. The window paper itself is changing in the diminishing light. During the day, it has a warm tone that comes from the linseed oil and the age of the paper. It glows softly when the light is behind it. Now, as the light outside fades, the paper becomes less luminous. It takes on a grey cast that is the color of the room itself reflected back from the inside. You can see your own faint reflection in the paper now more clearly than you could during the day. The reflection is a soft oval of your face, and the white shape of your cap and the dark mass of your shoulders. It is not a clear reflection like the one in the pewter plate. It is a ghost of a reflection, a suggestion that someone is sitting here looking out. The reflection does not move because you do not move. It simply rests there on the surface of the paper, a companion to your watching. The room behind you is growing darker as well. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a bed of coals that glows with a steady orange light. This light is enough to see by if you need to move around the room, but it does not reach the corners. The corners are filled with a soft darkness that has no edges. The summer beam overhead is barely visible now as a dark shape against the slightly lighter ceiling. The bundles of herbs that hang from the rafters are invisible. You know they are there because you touched them earlier and you smelled them and you watched the lavender buds fall. But now they are just a part of the general darkness above your head. They are waiting in the dark for the morning light, when they will become visible again and resume their quiet watch over the room. You hear a sound from outside. It is the first call of a whippoorwill somewhere in the woods beyond the common field. The call is 3 notes repeated in a pattern that sounds like the bird is saying its own name. Whip-poor-will. Whip-poor-will. The sound carries through the still evening air, and it reaches you through the oiled paper and the wooden walls. It is a clear sound with a slight burr to it that makes it seem closer than it probably is. The whippoorwill calls again, and then it pauses. In the pause, the silence is very deep. Then the call comes again and again, with the same spacing between each repetition. The bird will continue this calling for much of the night. It is a sound that you have heard so many times that you no longer hear it unless you listen for it. Tonight, you are listening. The call is a thread of sound that runs through the quiet, connecting one moment to the next. The whippoorwill pauses again, and in the silence, you hear another sound. This one is closer. It is the creak of a timber in the wall of the house. The day has been cool and now the night is cooler still, and the wood of the house is contracting as it gives up the small amount of warmth it absorbed during the daylight hours. The contraction causes the timbers to shift against each other and the joints to settle. The sound is a low groaning creak that lasts for a second and then fades. It is the sound of the house breathing out. You have heard this sound every night of the cold months, and it has become a part of the background of your life. It does not startle you. It is simply the house doing what houses do when the temperature changes. You shift slightly in your chair. Your back has been resting against the wooden slats, and the position has become mildly uncomfortable. You adjust your weight, and you feel the chair settle under you. The woven seat gives a little, and then holds. You fold your hands again in your lap, and you return to your watching. The eastern sky is now a deep blue-black that is almost the color of night, but not quite. There is still a faint line of lighter sky along the horizon where the last of the daylight lingers. This line is not bright. It is a pale grey blue that is barely visible against the darker sky above. It is the memory of the day that has passed, a thin reminder that the sun was here and will return. The line will fade soon. It is fading even as you watch. The darkness is creeping upward from the land and downward from the sky, and the line between them is growing thinner and thinner. The whippoorwill calls again, and this time another whippoorwill answers from somewhere farther away. The two calls overlap slightly, creating a brief moment of sound that is more complex than the single call. Then the nearer bird pauses, and the farther bird continues for a few repetitions before it too falls silent. The silence that follows is long and complete. Even the small sounds of the house seem to pause as if everything is listening. Then the nearer bird begins again, and the pattern resumes. You think about the day that has passed. It was a day like many other days in this season. Nothing remarkable happened. No one came to the door. No one came to the door. No news arrived from the village. The world outside this house continued on its way, and you continued on yours. You mended a tear in a linen shift, and you counted the cod fillets in the barrel, and you walked to the field and back, and you made butter, and you looked at lichen on the woodpile, and you polished a pewter plate, and you watched frost melt on the window, and you smelled dried herbs, and you fixed a split in a basket. These are the things that fill a life. They are small things taken one by one, but together they make up the fabric of the days. The fabric is strong and plain, and it holds together even when you do not think about it. The line of light on the horizon is gone now. You look for it, and you cannot find it. The eastern sky is a uniform darkness that meets the darker shape of the land without a clear boundary. The apple tree is completely invisible. The fence posts and the track to the common field and the stone wall at the edge of the woods are all swallowed by the night. The world outside has become a single thing made of darkness and quiet, and the sound of the whippoorwill. The window paper shows you nothing now except your own faint reflection and the dim orange glow of the hearth coals behind you. You become aware of the weight of your own body in the chair. Your feet are flat on the floor, and you can feel the cool smoothness of the pine boards through your stockings. Your hands are warm where they rest in your lap. Your shoulders have settled into a slight curve from the hours of sitting and working and sitting again. Your eyelids feel heavy with a heaviness that is not unpleasant. It is the natural heaviness that comes at the end of a day when the body knows it is time to rest. You do not fight it. You let your eyes close for a moment. The darkness behind your eyelids is a soft brown color with faint traces of the hearth glow swimming in it. You open your eyes again, and the room is the same. The window is the same dark rectangle. The coals are the same orange glow. Nothing has changed in the moment your eyes were closed. You think about the sleeping chamber that waits for you through the door. The bed is there with its wool blankets and linen sheets. The pillow is filled with feathers that have been smoothed and reshaped many times. The window in that room faces the same eastern sky, and it will show the first light in the morning when the sun rises. But that is many hours away. Between now and then, there is the long quiet of the night. You will lie in the bed and you will listen to the whippoorwill and the creaking of the house and your own slow breathing. You will drift into sleep and then into the deeper places where there are no sounds and no thoughts. The night will pass in its own way as it always does, without any help from you. The coals in the hearth shift with a soft ticking sound. A small piece of ash falls through the grate and lands in the pile below. The sound is tiny, but in the quiet of the room it is clear. You listen to it, and then you listen to the silence that follows. The silence is not empty. It is full of the small sounds that are always present if you pay attention. The hiss of the last moisture escaping from the coals. The rustle of the cat shifting in its sleep under the table. The faint sound of your own breath moving in and out. These sounds are so quiet that they are almost not sounds at all. They are more like the texture of the silence, a fine grain that you can feel if you are very still. The whippoorwill calls again, and this time it sounds farther away, as if the bird has moved deeper into the woods. The call comes 3 times, and then it stops. You wait for it to begin again, but it does not. Perhaps the bird has found a mate and has fallen silent. Perhaps it has simply moved beyond the range of your hearing. The night is large and the woods are deep, and a bird can travel a long way in the dark without being seen. You will hear it again tomorrow evening when the light begins to fade. It will be back in its usual place, calling out across the field. But for tonight, its work is done, and it has fallen quiet. You sit for a while longer in the silence. The room is almost completely dark now. The only light comes from the bed of coals in the hearth, and that light is dim and red, and it does not reach your chair. You can see the outline of the window frame against the slightly less dark rectangle of the window itself. You can see the faint glow of the coals reflected in the pewter plate on the mantel. You can see the dark shape of the table and the darker shape of the cat beneath it. Everything else is lost in the soft darkness that fills the keeping room like water filling a vessel. You decide that it is time to go to bed. You rise from the chair slowly, and your body makes the small sounds that bodies make when they have been still for a long time. Your knees pop softly, and your back stretches and your shoulders roll forward. You stand for a moment in the dark, letting your eyes adjust, even though there is nothing to see. You know the room so well that you do not need light to move through it. You know where the table is, and where the stool is, and where the wood box sits beside the hearth. You know the distance from the window to the door of the sleeping chamber. You have walked this path hundreds of times in the dark, and your feet remember the way. You walk to the hearth, and you take the wooden peel from its hook. You push the coals into a neat pile at the back of the fireplace. You take a small amount of ash from the side, and you sprinkle it over the coals to bank them for the night. The ash is fine and cool, and it settles over the coals like a grey blanket. The orange glow dims, but it does not go out. In the morning you will rake away the ash and find the embers still alive underneath. You set the peel back on its hook, and you wipe your hands on your apron. You walk to the door of the sleeping chamber. Your hand finds the latch in the dark and lifts it. The door swings open without a sound. The air in the chamber is cooler than the air in the keeping room, and it smells faintly of the lavender that you keep in the linen chest. You step inside and you close the door behind you. The chamber is completely dark. The window is a faint grey rectangle that is barely visible against the black wall. You find your way to the bed by touch. Your hands find the bedpost, and then the edge of the mattress, and then the folded blankets. You sit down on the edge of the bed, and you remove your shoes. You place them side by side on the floor, where you will find them in the morning. You remove your outer skirt and you hang it on the peg by the bed. You remove your cap and you set it on the small stool beside the bed. You lie down and you pull the blankets up to your chin. The wool is heavy and warm, and it smells of the hearth and of your own body and of the lavender from the chest. You lie on your back and you look toward the window. The grey rectangle is there, faint but present. It is the last thing you see before you close your eyes. The night is deep and quiet around you. The house has settled into its nighttime shape. The timbers have finished their contracting, and they are still. The coals in the other room are smouldering under their blanket of ash. The whippoorwill is silent. The village is silent. The world is silent except for the small sound of your own breathing, which is slow and even and already beginning to take on the rhythm of sleep. You close your eyes. The darkness behind your eyelids is complete. There are no after-images from the fire because the fire was too dim. There is only a soft velvety blackness that seems to go on forever. You feel the weight of the blankets and the softness of the pillow, and the slight rise and fall of your own chest. Your thoughts become slower and less distinct. They drift from one thing to another without any urgency. The linen shift with its mended shoulder, the frost melting on the window, the lichen on the oak log, the lavender bud falling to the table, the pewter plate catching the firelight, the basket made whole again. These images float through your mind like leaves on a slow stream, and then they fade into the darkness. Your breathing deepens, the muscles of your face relax, your hands uncurl where they rest on the blanket. The night holds you in its quiet, and the house holds you in its walls, and the earth holds the house on its foundation. Outside, the eastern sky continues to darken toward the deepest part of the night. In a few hours it will begin to lighten again, first with a faint grey line along the horizon, and then with the pale glow that comes before the sun. But that is still far away. For now there is only the darkness and the quiet and the slow drift into sleep. You let go of the day, and you let the night take you. The room is still. The house is still. The village is still. And you sleep.